I work at the Mesa Rosa Diner. Don't bother looking it up. It won't show on any GPS, and if you did happen to stumble across it by accident, odds are you'd keep driving anyway. It sits somewhere off State Route 50, between the jagged shoulders of two forgotten hills in the Nevada desert. They call that stretch the loneliest road in America. That's not just a nickname, it's a warning, if you ask me. Why do I work there? The short answer is that I ran out of better options. The long answer has more cracks and regrets than I care to get into. You don't end up in a place like Mesa Rosa because you're chasing a dream. You end up there because the world chewed you up, spit you out, and you were too tired to keep running. But there's something else too. Something that doesn't make sense no matter how many times I try to explain it. Something about this diner that's magnetic. The sign out front is half burnt out neon, buzzing like a mosquito stuck in a jar. Mesa Rosa, it says in loopy cursive, though this flickers in and out so often, it might as well say Mea Roa. Inside, the place looks like a snapshot from the 1950s. Vinyl booths, a chrome counter, checkered floor tiles worn down from decades of feet. There's a jukebox in the corner, but nobody touches it. Not because it doesn't work, it does somehow, but because sometimes it plays on its own. Songs nobody picks, songs nobody remembers being recorded. First time I heard that damn jukebox come to life, it played something slow and haunting, like a lullaby from a place where lullabies are written to mourn the living. I had just started my shift, and the whole place was empty except for one old guy nursing black coffee. The song started up, and he didn't even flinch, just kept staring out the window like he was waiting for something he hoped would never show. I should mention this now. The pay is incredible. Like, too incredible. $50 an hour. That alone should have been the red flag, but back then I was too broke and too grateful to care. I asked Maria, my manager, about it during my orientation, expecting some under-the-table drug ring explanation. She just looked me dead in the eye and said, "You follow the rules, you get paid well. That's all there is to it." I laughed at first. What rules? The ones that matter. Turns out, there are a lot of them. Most are simple enough. Keep the booths clean. Never let the pie case run empty. Always keep a pot of coffee brewing, even if there are no customers. Then there are the stranger ones, like the booth by the window on the left side, booth number 9. You don't clean it. You don't sit in it. You don't talk about it unless someone else brings it up first. There's also a mirror in the back hall that leads to the pantry. It's covered with an old cloth nailed into the wall. We're told not to touch it. Maria gave me the full speech on day 1. I didn't know what to make of it. I thought maybe it was some quirky hazing tradition, something to spook the newbies, but everyone who worked there took it deathly seriously. Nobody joked about it. There's one cook named Kenny who's been here the longest, if that means anything. 5 years. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, it's all sideways glances and cryptic advice. The desert knows who belongs here, he told me one night while wiping his hands on a greasy towel. And who doesn't? What does that mean? I asked. He just gave me a tight smile and walked away. For the first couple weeks, things were normal enough, or what passes for normal out here. Customers come and go, truckers, drifters, lost tourists. Everyone seems a little quieter than you'd expect. Like the diner steals your voice when you walk through the door, conversations die out quickly, people eat, pay, and leave. No lingering, except one. But I'll get to that later. I found a rhythm in the weirdness. I showed up, did my work, and tried not to think too hard about the little things. Like how the clock in the kitchen never moves past 3:17, no matter how many times we replace the batteries. Or how the desert outside sometimes looks off. Like it's breathing. Like the dunes aren't just shifting from wind but rearranging themselves with purpose. I remember the first time I stayed past midnight. Maria had to leave early, and I offered to close. She gave me this long look before agreeing. told me to keep the doors locked after 11 and not to answer if anyone knocked. Even if they look lost? Especially if they look lost, she said. That night, around 12:40, I heard footsteps crunching the gravel outside. Someone walked the perimeter of the building. Slow, deliberate steps. They didn't knock, but I knew they were there. I felt them, like a weight pressing down on the air inside. The jukebox turned on by itself and played that same song again. The lullaby. I sat behind the counter, clutching the baseball bat we kept by the register. The lights flickered once, then went still. I waited. The footsteps moved away eventually, swallowed by the endless silence outside. The next morning, Maria asked how the close went. I told her everything. She just nodded and said, "You did good. No questions. No explanations." That was the moment I realized something deeper was going on. This place wasn't just old and creepy. It wasn't just eccentric. It was aware. And then, last week, I noticed something strange. The napkin holder at booth number 9 had a single folded napkin in it, neatly placed. I hadn't seen anyone sit there. No one ever does. I asked Kenny about it, but he just frowned. "Don't touch it," he said. "But someone's been there. Then let them be." I stared at that napkin for a long time. I wanted to pick it up. To read it, maybe. See if there was a note. But my hand wouldn't move. It was like my body knew better than my brain. Later that night, I looked out the diner window and saw someone standing near the edge of the lot. Too far to make out details. Just a silhouette. Still. Watching. There was something off about the posture. It didn't look natural. Like whoever it was didn't quite understand how standing worked. I blinked, and they were gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow. Nothing to worry about. But I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, staring up at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, listening to the wind whisper things it didn't want me to hear. The next day, Maria called a staff meeting. That never happens. "We might be having a visitor soon," she said. "Just remember what I've told you. Stick to your lane. Follow the rules. No matter what." Nobody asked questions. And me? I just nodded. But my curiosity was burning hotter than ever. What kind of visitor would warrant that kind of warning? And why did booth number 9 look like it had been recently cleaned? I didn't know then, but I was about to find out. The first time I saw him, it was just after the sun had dipped behind the hills, that half-light hour when the desert stops pretending to be warm and starts whispering secrets in the wind. We hadn't had a customer in nearly 45 minutes. I was wiping down the counter, absently watching the neon sign outside flicker and hum like it always does when the power grid has one of its little mood swings. He didn't walk in. Or if he did, I missed it. 1 minute the place was empty, and the next there he was, sitting in booth number 9, the one we weren't supposed to talk about, the one we were definitely never supposed to clean or touch or sit in. He didn't make a sound, didn't signal. Just sat there, arms resting lightly on the table, fingers folded neatly together like he was waiting for a dinner companion who was running late. I froze with the rag still in my hand. Maria wasn't on shift that night. It was just me and Kenny and the new girl, Lacey, who hadn't lasted long enough to know what the booth even meant. She spotted him too, leaned close to me and said, "Hey, when did that guy come in?" I don't know what possessed me, but I just shook my head and told her, "Don't worry about it. I'll handle it." Kenny must have overheard because the swinging door to the kitchen flapped open and he barked, "Don't." Lacey jumped a little. I probably did too. Kenny didn't shout often, and when he did, it felt like someone had kicked open a grave. He stared me down. Leave him be. And so, we did. But the tension in the room turned thick enough to chew. I watched from behind the counter, sneaking glances between pretending to refill salt shakers and organizing sugar packets that didn't need organizing, He looked ordinary, not in a forgettable way, but in a deliberate kind of normal. Average height, clean-shaven, gray-brown suit, the kind you might see on an insurance salesman from the 1970s. His shoes were clean, too clean for the dirt lot out front. He never moved much. Just scanned the diner with this calm, patient look, like he was taking mental inventory of every surface, every sound, every flicker of light. And then the jukebox turned on again. Not a full song this time. Just a few distorted chords, warbled like a cassette tape that had been left in the sun too long. The sound scratched through the air, and I swear I felt it in my teeth. Lacey looked up from her side work, confused. Kenny didn't even flinch. "Is that thing on a timer or something?" she asked. I lied and said yes. The man in booth number 9 didn't react. He kept his eyes fixed on the far wall, not looking at anyone, not even when a moth batted itself uselessly against the fluorescent light above his head. He blinked slowly, deliberately, like someone trying to remember how. I wanted to ask Kenny who he was, what he was, but he wouldn't have answered. I already knew that. He only gave answers in riddles, if at all, and I was in no mood to decode desert poetry. Eventually, after maybe half an hour, the man stood up. He didn't leave through the front door. He just walked toward the hallway near the restrooms and vanished. I mean that literally. One moment he was there, and the next, I blinked, and the hallway was empty. Kenny muttered something under his breath. Might have been a prayer, might have been a curse. Hard to tell with him. Later, after Lacey had gone home and the diner was locked up, Kenny and I sat at the counter in silence, nursing stale coffee. I finally asked, "That was him, wasn't it?" He didn't answer right away, just stared into his mug like it held the secrets of the universe. "He always comes alone," Kenny said. "He always sits there, and he always leaves before sunrise." I waited. Nothing else came. "How long has he been showing up?" Kenny shrugged. "Longer than me, longer than Maria, longer than the sign out front." The idea made my skin crawl. The Mesa Rosa had stood for at least 50 years, probably more. If what Kenny was saying was true, then the man, whatever he was, wasn't just part of the diner. He was part of the desert. The next few weeks passed without incident. Business was steady. Regulars came and went. Lacey quit after 3 shifts. Said the place gave her sleep paralysis vibes, whatever that meant. Maria said nothing, just added her name to the list on the clipboard we kept in the office. A long list of short careers. I found myself watching the calendar, noticing patterns. Booth number 9 always looked untouched, but somehow different. Like the lighting changed around it subtly, like it was set to a different brightness than the rest of the room, like it existed a half second out of sync. And then, right on cue, he came again. This time, Maria was working. The second she saw him, she stiffened. Not fear, exactly. More like reverence. She pulled me aside. "Do not engage. Don't even look for too long. Just keep doing your job." "Who is he?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is that we respect the agreement." That made me pause. "What agreement?" She didn't answer. Just walked away, her jaw clenched tight. So, I did what I was told. I refilled coffee cups, cleaned menus, pretended there wasn't a man-shaped anomaly in booth number 9 watching the world like it was a nature documentary. One of our regulars, Donnie, a trucker who came in every Thursday for meatloaf, walked in halfway through the man's visit. He paused at the door, eyes landing on the booth. For a second, he looked like he was going to turn around and leave. But then he squared his shoulders and came to the counter. "He's back," he said quietly. I nodded. "You know," he continued almost to himself, "last time he showed up, there was a rock slide out by Fallon. Killed 3 people. Whole ridge just collapsed overnight." I didn't know what to say. "You think it's related?" I asked. He gave me this look, a mix of pity and warning. Out here, everything's related. After that, Donnie ate fast. Didn't even finish his coffee. He left a 20 and told me to keep the change. Said he wouldn't be back for a while. The man in the booth stayed for another hour, unmoving. Maria never took her eyes off him, not really. She pretended to check stock behind the counter, but her gaze kept drifting. And then, without a word, he was gone again. No footsteps, no sound, just absence. That night, I dreamed of static, walls melting into sand, a voice that sounded like my own whispering questions I didn't remember asking. The next morning, Maria handed me a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" "A new rule," she said. "From him." I unfolded it. The handwriting was precise, neat to the point of being mechanical. "No one sits at the counter when he is present." "He left this?" She nodded. "Why now?" "Because one of the agents sat there last time, the one with the mustache. He's gone now." My throat tightened. She tapped the note. "Frame it. Hang it next to the register. Make sure everyone sees it." So, I did. And as I hammered the small nail into the wood, I realized something that chilled me more than the silence, more than the jukebox, more than the shadows that sometimes leaned the wrong way. He wasn't just a visitor. He was watching to see who was paying attention. It started with a question I didn't even mean to ask. It had been quiet that night. Quiet in a way that doesn't feel peaceful, but expectant. Like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. No trucks on the road, no wind. Just a stillness so total that even the buzzing of the neon sign outside sounded distant, like it was leaking in from another time. Maria had gone home early. Kenny had called out, which was rare. It left just me and the desert. And him. I hadn't seen him walk in. I never did. One moment the booth was empty, and the next it was occupied, like someone had edited the frame of a movie while I blinked. Booth number 9. Same posture, same neutral expression, same untouched menu laid out in front of him like a prop. I stood behind the counter and watched him from the corner of my eye, pretending to wipe down already clean surfaces. My hands moved out of habit, but my mind had drifted. Something about that night felt different. He looked bored. That was the best word I could come up with. His usual demeanor was passive, distant. But tonight, there was something in the way his eyes lingered too long on the ceiling, or how he tapped one finger against the side of the table. Restless, like he was waiting on someone to do something. And then I opened my mouth. "Are you lonely?" I didn't plan to say it. I didn't even hear the words come out until they were already echoing off the walls. The air went cold, sharp as glass. My breath caught in my throat. He didn't move. I stood frozen behind the register, half expecting the lights to cut out, or the jukebox to start screeching, or reality itself to collapse inward. But none of that happened. He simply turned his head and looked at me. His gaze was calm, curious. It wasn't the expression of someone annoyed or angry. If anything, it was the expression of someone delighted. "Sometimes," he said. His voice was smooth and neutral, like a news anchor on the radio. No accent, no inflection. The kind of voice designed to be forgettable. But the moment it touched the air, I knew I'd never forget it. He waited like he expected me to respond. I didn't. Instead, I looked down at my hands and realized they were trembling. I busied myself with rearranging the napkin holders again, desperate to feel normal. Desperate to undo what I'd just done. "You're curious," he said. I didn't reply. Good. That single word carried weight, like it was an answer to a question I hadn't asked out loud yet. A reward. When I finally looked up, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound. Just the fading sense of presence, like a TV turned off mid-broadcast. The lights flickered, just once, and the jukebox began to hum again. This time it played something different. A soft instrumental, like a lullaby on a piano underwater. I didn't recognize the song, but it made my eyes sting and my throat tighten. I found myself crying without understanding why. I called Maria the next morning and told her what happened. There was a long pause on the other end. "Did he give you his name?" she asked. "Number just said he gets lonely," said I was curious. Another pause, longer this time. "You need to be careful now." "He didn't threaten me." "No," she said, "he never does." That's the problem. I didn't know what she meant until later. It started with the clocks. The one above the coffee station stopped moving at 2:46 a.m. It stayed there even when the batteries were replaced. The hands just hovered, suspended. Then the reflection in the front window began to lag. It sounds insane to describe it that way, but it's true. If I moved suddenly, I would see myself catch up a second later. Sometimes it didn't match at all. Sometimes the reflection was looking elsewhere. Kenny returned to work a few days later. When I told him, he looked tired. "You spoke to him," he said, matter of fact. I asked a question. "That's it. You gave him a door." "Into what?" "You." I didn't believe him at first, but I felt it. At night, I began to hear things. Humming behind walls, static whispers under the floor, my own voice murmuring questions I never remembered asking. One night, as I was closing up, I found a note on the counter, folded neatly like something left behind after a date. I hadn't seen anyone come in. "Do you remember the dream with the red hallway?" The words hit like a punch to the ribs. I had dreamed of that hallway the night before. Endless, sterile, hospital lighting with no doors. The walls pulsed like living things. I had run, barefoot and breathless, with something always just behind me, always just out of sight. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, but I didn't sleep that night. The next visit came sooner than expected. Only 12 days had passed, not the usual month. He sat down as always, same booth, same posture. But this time, he watched me openly, like a student waiting for a class to begin. I avoided his gaze, worked through my checklist like nothing was different, but I could feel the pressure of his presence like humidity pressing against my skin. Then he spoke. "You asked me a question. It's only fair I ask one in return." I wanted to pretend I hadn't heard him, but I was already caught. We were in it now, whatever it was. "Okay," I said quietly. "What's the worst thing you've ever done?" I blinked. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it, just teeth. I turned away, said nothing, cleaned the same spot on the counter for 5 full minutes until I heard the bell above the door chime. When I looked up, he was gone. That night, I dreamed of Malcolm. Malcolm wasn't real. At least I didn't think he was. He was a boy I went to school with. Or maybe not. My memory of him was hazy, like a photograph water-damaged just enough to blur the face. In the dream, Malcolm was trapped behind a pane of glass. He was mouthing something, but I couldn't hear it. When I pressed my hand to the glass, he backed away, afraid, as if I were the thing he feared. I woke up sweating, and I swear I heard someone whisper, "Good." The next morning, the napkin holders were rearranged. All of them faced backward. No one else had been on shift. Maria returned the next night. When she saw me, she pulled me into the office and closed the door. "You need to stop," she said. "Stop what? I haven't done anything." "You've engaged. You broke the silence. He has your scent now." I stared at her. "Do you even know what he is?" She looked tired, older than I'd ever seen her. Number and I never wanted to. I just follow the rules. That's how you stay alive. Then why stay here? Why run this place if it terrifies you? She looked out the office window. toward booth number 9. Because someone has to. That night, the jukebox played again. This time, it was a song I used to sing as a kid. One I hadn't thought about in years. My mother used to hum it while making breakfast, but the lyrics were wrong, twisted, half a beat off, and the voice wasn't hers. I stood alone in the empty diner, staring at the machine, feeling like the walls were breathing with me, or instead of me. And I realized something important. Curiosity wasn't just dangerous here. It was the bait. And I had taken it. The dreams were getting worse. It wasn't just the red hallway anymore. It was the diner, too. Bent and broken versions of it that made no sense. The booths were too tall. The tables stretched into infinity. The floor was sticky with a dark sludge that smelled like burnt sugar and old copper. The jukebox played nothing but static, and the windows showed not the desert, but a vast field of twitching shapes silhouetted against a starlit sky that never blinked. I'd wake up gasping, sometimes screaming. I started keeping the lights on when I slept. Didn't help. The shadows were getting bold. One night I saw a figure standing in the corner of my room, perfectly still, its head tilting in fractions, as if studying me. I blinked and it was gone, but I didn't sleep again after that. At work, Maria avoided my eyes. Kenny gave me a look that said more than words could. You invited this. The booth was always ready now. Even when the diner opened at 6 a.m. and the parking lot was still a sheet of dew-soaked silence, booth number 9 would sit pristine. Polished table, folded napkin, glass of water with a single ice cube already melting. No one admitted to setting it, but it was always there. I stopped asking questions. I already knew the answers would be worse than silence. It wasn't long before he returned. No pattern this time. No cycle. Just him, appearing like a thought you didn't want to have. Only this time he smiled. It was wrong. Not the usual polite, neutral smile he wore like a mask. This one stretched too far, like his skin didn't know how much it could hold. I was alone on the floor again. Maria was in the back pretending to do inventory. He didn't wait long. Would you like to know something about yourself? He asked. His voice had a new rhythm to it, like it was being tuned, modulated slightly off. Like a recording of a person rather than a person himself. I didn't answer. My mouth was too dry. He leaned forward, hands still folded neatly. You used to lie awake at night when you were 7, imagining your parents were dead, just to see if you could make yourself cry. And when you couldn't, you felt broken. Do you remember that? My knees went weak. I gripped the counter to stay upright. You think that moment was meaningless, but it wasn't. It opened a door. He paused. Not to me, of course, but something else looked through. Just for a moment. What are you? I asked. I didn't mean to, but the words fell out of me like blood from a wound. He grinned, teeth too uniform. I am your echo, the one that answers when no one else does. He stood up, not all at once, but in phases, one frame after another, like an animation that skipped frames. He walked past me, not toward the front door, toward the kitchen. Maria stepped out, blocking him. He stopped, tilted his head, that same curious angle I'd seen in my room. You know the rules, she said. He nodded, stepped backward, perfectly straight, like he was rewinding. Maria didn't say anything else, didn't even look at me. After he left, or whatever his version of leaving was, she grabbed me by the arm and dragged me into the back. You need to get out of here. What do you mean? He's picking you, or grooming you. I don't know what word fits, but he's circling you like you're already his. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to quit? I want you to live. But I didn't quit. And I think that disappointed her more than anything else. The next night, Someone new started. A guy named Craig, early 20s, wiry, eager in that way people get when they think they're outsmarting life by working an easy gig for big pay. He asked too many questions, talked too fast. Maria gave him the rules. I saw it happen, the same speech she gave me and a dozen others before him. Some booths are off limits. You don't clean the mirror in the back. If something strange happens, don't react. If he appears, do nothing. Craig laughed. Nervous chuckle. Said something about practical jokes. She didn't laugh back. I should have stopped him, should have said something. But I didn't. The next week he came again. Booth number 9, usual spot. Usual smile. But this time, he looked around the diner like he was expecting someone. Craig was taking out the trash. He came back in through the side door, humming to himself. Didn't even see the booth until he was halfway to the kitchen. Then he froze. The man stood, raised a hand. "Young man," he said. Craig blinked. "Yeah? Could you help me with something?" I opened my mouth to shout, to say anything, but the air turned to syrup in my lungs. I couldn't breathe, let alone speak. Craig took a step forward. Maria burst through the back, eyes wide. "No," she screamed. Too late. Craig reached out, just to take the glass of water from the table. The man touched his wrist, and Craig was gone. Not like a puff of smoke. Not like he vanished. He was just edited out. One moment there. The next, the space around him collapsed inward like a JPEG compression glitch. The man sat back down, sipped the water, then turned to me. "You understand now?" I nodded, barely. "Good. Then let's keep going." He didn't ask another question, not that night. Just sat, watched, and smiled. Maria didn't cry, but she didn't speak either. She walked out the next morning, didn't even collect her last paycheck, just left her keys on the counter with a note that said, 10, that was the number, I'm done. Now it was just me and Kenny. Kenny didn't ask what happened to Craig. He knew. He pulled up a stool beside me, unwrapped a sandwich from foil, and said, "You know he's not the only one, right?" "What?" Kenny took a bite, chewed slowly. "There are others. Like him. Different styles, different faces. This one likes to be watched, likes the ritual. Others like noise. Some show up in hospital basements, or halfway through a sermon. But they all want something." I leaned forward, feeling sick. "What does he want?" Kenny smiled, sad and tired. To be seen, and eventually, to be followed. I looked out at the diner. Booth number 9 was empty again. But it wouldn't stay that way. That night I stayed late. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted answers. Maybe because part of me, the part that lay awake at 7 years old, trying to cry over dead parents that were still alive, wanted to prove I wasn't broken. That I could feel something. He returned at 3:13 a.m., sat down like always, but this time I joined him. The booth felt colder than the rest of the diner. The air was heavier. Sitting across from him was like staring into the eyes of an animal you couldn't name. "Are you ready to know why I'm here?" he asked. I nodded. "Because this place is special. It listens back. You think it's about me, but really I'm just a symptom. You built a place that remembers every pain that walks through it, every regret, every unfinished thought." He leaned closer. "I love it here." I stood up, walked out, didn't lock the door behind me. Outside, the sky was packed with stars, but none of them felt like they belonged to us anymore. The desert didn't feel like Nevada. It felt like waiting, and I knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. The strangest part of everything was how normal the days became again. After Craig vanished, and Maria walked out with nothing but her coat and her silence, things just settled. No grand collapse, no breaking news. Just the same eggs over easy, the same chipped mugs filled with black coffee, The same view of the empty highway stretching into nowhere, like the diner itself had a short memory, or maybe just a cold one. It was just me and Kenny now. He didn't talk much, but he stayed. Didn't even blink when I told him I'd sat with the man in the booth, that I'd asked questions, that I'd listened to answers I wish I could forget. He just nodded, like that was always going to happen. Customers still came. Drifters, truckers, the occasional lost tourist whose phone GPS led them off course and into our slice of purgatory. I wondered if any of them ever felt it, that subtle wrongness in the air, the way time seemed to hang heavier here than elsewhere. Most didn't stay long, couldn't sit still. Something about the lighting maybe, or the way the jukebox hummed like it was holding its breath. The booth remained untouched, until he returned. This time, there was no preamble, no warning. He just walked through the front door, casual as you like, with the early morning sun painting the glass behind him a brilliant red gold. He smiled. I didn't say anything. He sat. Booth number 9, of course. But he didn't look at me this time, not right away. I went about the morning routine, brewed the coffee, checked the registers, pretended not to glance at him every few seconds. Eventually, he waved me over, just one hand lifted slightly. Not a command, an invitation. And for some reason, I went. I slid into the booth across from him and waited. He didn't speak for a while, just looked around the diner like it was a painting he'd seen 1,000 times, but still noticed something new every time he stared. Then he leaned forward. "It's been quiet," he said. I nodded. "I like the quiet." Another nod. My voice had gone missing again. He tapped the table once. "You know, I don't have to be cruel. I never wanted to be. But the rules, they're bigger than me too." I found my voice, buried under the dust. "What are the rules?" He smiled at that, like I'd asked the right question, but far too late. "I arrive. I watch. I am not to be served. I must not be touched. No one joins me. No one engages unless I allow it." He held up a hand, ticking off fingers. "When these are broken, there is a cost. You've seen that now." I nodded again. "Then why me?" I asked. That made him pause. A long, thoughtful pause. Then, "Because you're still trying to make sense of things. That's rare. Most people, when faced with something they don't understand, shut the door, lock it, forget the hallway even existed. But you keep looking through the keyhole, even when you know there's something staring back." He leaned back. "That makes you interesting." I didn't feel flattered. Kenny came out from the back, apron smeared with fryer grease. He didn't react, didn't flinch, just gave me a look that meant, "Keep your seat. I'll handle the rest." The man didn't even glance at him, like Kenny wasn't part of this scene. "What happens next?" I asked. He tilted his head, a motion that had started to feel deeply wrong the more I saw it, like watching a mannequin trying to emulate a shrug. "That depends," he said, "on whether you want the game to end, or evolve." I looked down at the table. There was a sugar packet, torn open. I hadn't seen him do that. "And if I leave?" He shrugged, a more human one this time. "You can try. People always can. But the roads have long memories. You'll find yourself back here eventually. Might look like a different place. Might even be a different time. But it will be here." I swallowed hard. "So, I'm trapped?" "You're chosen." I stood. He didn't stop me. Just smiled, that same too-wide smile, and watched me walk back behind the counter. He stayed another hour. Didn't say a word. Didn't order anything. Just sat, hands folded, watching the door. When he finally left, it was the first time I heard the bell chime behind him. A small, ordinary sound that felt enormous. On the counter, after he vanished, was a paper napkin. On it, written in a looping hand, was a single line. "Thank you for the conversation. I'll be back with another question soon." I burned the napkin in the kitchen sink, watched the flames eat the words letter by letter until they were just black curls of nothing. But the meaning stayed. The next morning, Kenny found a box outside the diner door. Plain cardboard, no label. Just sitting on the step like a stray cat. He brought it in, set it on the counter. We stared at it for 10 solid minutes. "You gonna open it?" he finally asked. I shook my head. If it wants to be opened, it will be. And it did. That night, when I was alone. I didn't touch it, I swear. But when I turned around to restock the mugs and turned back, the box was open. Inside, a cake. Chocolate, with red frosting letters that said, "1 year. Congrats." I hadn't realized it had been exactly a year. On top of the cake, pressed into the frosting, was a photograph. Black and white. Me, standing outside the diner, smiling. I don't remember ever standing like that, or smiling like that. In the background, just barely visible, was a shape, a blur. But I knew it was him. I keep the photo in my wallet now. Not sure why. Maybe as a reminder. Maybe because it feels like the only proof I have that any of this is real. The diner still runs. The jukebox still sings when it wants to. Booth number 9 stays empty most days, but not all. Sometimes people ask about it. The new cook last week, a kid named Julio, pointed to it and said, "Hey, someone spilled something on that seat. Looks like blood." It wasn't blood. I checked. It was rust, or something that looked like rust, but it flaked when I touched it, and the air around it smelled like ozone and lilacs. I told Julio the seat was broken. He didn't ask again. Some nights I still dream. Less now, but they're stranger, softer. Like something's pacing itself, like it's waiting. The desert never answers, but it listens. And me? I pour coffee. I wipe tables. I keep my eyes open and my mouth shut. Because out here, under the silence of 1,000 stars, the only thing more dangerous than a question is an answer.
There are roads all over the world that feel different after the sun goes down. By day, they are just asphalt and concrete, arteries of commerce and travel, loud with the sounds of life. But at night, they transform. They become lonely, isolated ribbons of darkness, punctuated only by the sweep of your own headlights. And in some parts of the world, on certain roads, that loneliness feels occupied. Thailand is a country of vibrant life, but also of deep-seated belief in the world of spirits. Drive anywhere outside bustling city centers, and you'll see them. Tiny, ornate houses perched on pillars at the entrances to homes, businesses, and even along the most desolate stretches of highway. These are spirit houses, offerings of shelter for the unseen guardians of the land. They are a constant, silent reminder that we are not alone, that another world exists parallel to our own. For most, they are a comfort, but on some roads, they feel more like a warning. This is a story about one of those roads. It's an account from a long-haul truck driver, a man who spent his life on the highways of Thailand. We'll call him Somchai. For men like Somchai, the road is their office and their home. They know its rhythms, its dangers, and its secrets. They trade stories at roadside cafes and loading docks, stories of bad weather, close calls, and sometimes things that cannot be so easily explained. One moonless night, Somchai was on a routine delivery, a long, monotonous drive through the rural heart of the country, on a highway notorious for its sharp, unforgiving turns. He was halfway through his journey, the cab filled with the low hum of the engine and the soft crackle of a distant radio station. It was just another night, another job, until he smelled it. A faint, sweet scent drifting through the vents. It was unmistakable. The fragrance of fresh jasmine flowers. He frowned, checking the small Buddhist altar on his dashboard. There was a plastic garland there, faded with age, but it had no scent. He checked the passenger seat, the floor, nothing. The cab was clean, yet the sweet, floral scent grew stronger, as if a fresh garland had just been placed right beside him in the darkness. He was hundreds of kilometers from the nearest market, alone on an empty highway, and the scent of jasmine was filling his truck. Somchai was not a man given to flights of fancy. In his late 40s, with a face weathered by 2 decades of sun and road dust, he saw the world in practical terms. A shipment had a destination. A truck needed fuel. A family needed to be provided for. His world was one of logistics and deadlines, of long hours spent watching the white lines of the highway disappear under his wheels. His cab was his sanctuary, a small, cluttered universe of his own making. Tucked into the dashboard was a faded photograph of his wife and young daughter, their smiles a silent promise of what waited for him at home. Next to them, a small, gold-cased amulet from a revered monk swayed gently with the motion of the truck, a quiet nod to the traditions he was raised with. He didn't consider himself deeply religious, but a little protection never hurt. On the road, you took every advantage you could get. The highway he was on was an old one, known to drivers simply as the Serpent. Newer, wider motorways had since been built, but the Serpent offered a shortcut, slicing through a range of steep, jungle-covered hills. It was a route that saved time and fuel, but it demanded respect. Its curves were notoriously tight, its surface uneven, and parts of it were shrouded in a perpetual twilight beneath a thick canopy of ancient trees. And it had a reputation. Other drivers spoke of it in hushed tones. She talked about its most infamous section, a sharp, hairpin turn at the bottom of a long, steep grade. They called it the Widow's Curve. Roadside shrines, more numerous there than anywhere else, stood as grim testaments to its history. They were laden with offerings, bottles of red soda, half-burned incense sticks, and garlands of marigolds and jasmine, all placed to appease whatever lingered there. Somchai tried not to think about such things. They were just stories, campfire tales for truckers. The real dangers were falling asleep at the wheel, a blown tire, or a sudden downpour making the asphalt slick as oil. But the smell of jasmine was real. It was no longer faint. It was a thick, cloying sweetness that coated the back of his throat. He coughed, rolling down his window to let the humid night air rush in, hoping to clear it out. The air outside smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, the raw scent of the jungle. Yet inside the cab, the floral perfume persisted. He couldn't understand it. He started to feel a prickle of unease, an unfamiliar guest on his long, solitary drives. It was like someone had opened a bottle of strong perfume right next to him. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the road. The engine's drone was a familiar comfort. He took a sip of lukewarm tea from his flask. For the next hour, the drive was uneventful. He saw no other cars. The jungle was a solid wall of black on either side of the road, the only movement the sway of leaves in his headlights. Then, up ahead, in the far reach of his high beams, he saw a shape. It was a person, standing on the narrow shoulder of the road. As he drew closer, the details resolved into a silhouette. A woman, slender and still. She was wearing a simple, pale-colored dress that seemed to glow in the stark light of the truck. Her hand was raised, not in a frantic wave for help, but in a slow, almost lazy gesture. Sungchai's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His first thought was a robbery. It was a common tactic. A woman feigning distress, with men waiting in the darkness of the trees. Company policy was clear, drilled into every driver. You do not stop. You never, ever stop. But what if she was genuinely in trouble? What if her car had broken down just out of sight? The nearest village was at least 50 kilometers away. Leaving her out here felt wrong. He eased his foot off the accelerator, the truck slowing with a low rumble. He wouldn't stop completely, he decided, but he would slow down enough to get a better look, and then he would radio for help as soon as he got a signal. As the truck crept closer, the headlights illuminated her fully. Her dress was white, plain and a little old-fashioned. Her long, black hair was soaking wet, clinging to her face and shoulders, as if she'd just been caught in a storm, that the road was dry. It hadn't rained here for days. Her face was stark white, devoid of expression, and her dark eyes were fixed on his cab, tracking his approach. She looked right at him, through the glass, as if she could see him sitting there, debating what to do. He made his decision. He couldn't risk it. He pressed his foot back down on the accelerator, bringing the truck back up to speed. For a brief second, as he passed her, their eyes met. There was no anger in her gaze, no desperation. There was nothing, just a profound, hollow emptiness that made the air in his cab turn instantly, bitingly cold. The overwhelming scent of jasmine flooded his senses, so powerful it made his eyes water. It was suffocating. He drove on, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't dare look back right away. He waited, counting the seconds until a full minute had passed. He forced himself to take a deep, shaky breath, and then he glanced at the large, convex mirror mounted on his passenger side door. The beam of his taillights painted the road behind him in a faint red glow. The stretch of asphalt where she had been standing was completely empty. He scanned the mirror, his eyes darting back and forth. She wasn't walking away. She wasn't running into the trees. She had simply ceased to be there. In the space of a few seconds, on a road with nowhere to go, she had vanished. Fatigue, he muttered to himself, the word sounding hollow in the quiet cab. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. It happened on long drives, highway hypnosis. You saw things that weren't there. Shadows moved. The trees played tricks on you. But he had never seen anything so clear, so real, and he had never felt a cold like that. It wasn't the air. It was a cold that seemed to come from inside him, settling deep in his bones. He reached for his radio microphone, flipping the switch to the emergency channel. "This is truck 745, he said, his voice hoarse, requesting assistance. There is a..." He stopped. What would he say? That he saw a woman who disappeared? They would think he was drunk or crazy. He tried anyway. He held down the button to speak, but the only sound that came from the speaker was a loud crackling as of static. He switched channels, more static. Every frequency was dead. He put the microphone back in its cradle. The jasmine scent was fading now, replaced by the normal smells of vinyl and old coffee. But the silence it left behind felt heavier, deeper. The rhythmic hum of his engine no longer felt comforting. It only served to emphasize how utterly alone he was. And for the first time in his long career, Sunshine was afraid of the road. He drove for another 30 minutes, the silence in the cab stretching his nerves thin. He tried to hum a tune, a folk song his wife liked to sing, but the sound died in his throat. The jungle seemed to press in closer, the ancient trees forming a claustrophobic tunnel around the road. In his peripheral vision, shadows writhed and danced, always dissolving back into nothingness. The moment he turned to look, he felt like a mouse being watched by a cat. He knew he was approaching the widow's curve. He'd driven it 1,000 times in the light of day, but at night, it was different. You could feel the history of the place. As the truck began its long, winding descent down the steep grade, he saw the cluster of spirit houses come into view. They were packed tightly together on the inside of the curve, small village of silent, ornate guardians. Offerings of fonta and incense lay before them, catching the sweep of his headlights. Tonight, they didn't look comforting. They looked like headstones. The air grew thick, heavy. It felt like driving through water. He gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, and geared down, letting the engine brake do most of the work. The curve was a blind one, wrapping around the side of the hill. He took it slow, his eyes scanning the asphalt ahead, and then his blood ran cold. There, in the center of his lane, just as the road began to straighten out, was a crumpled shape. It wasn't an animal or a pile of debris. It was the unmistakable form of a person lying face down on the pavement. A guttural sound escaped Somchai's throat as he stomped on the brakes. The truck protested with a deafening screech of tortured metal and rubber. The air brakes hissed violently, and the whole rig shuddered, threatening to jackknife before lurching to a final, jarring halt. The front of his truck was less than 3 meters from the body. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The silence that rushed in after the noise was absolute. All he could hear was the frantic, painful thumping of his own heart. He had hit them where they had been lying there, and he shook his head, trying to clear the fog of panic. With hands that trembled uncontrollably, he fumbled for the heavy metal flashlight he kept in the side pocket of his door. He clicked it on, its beam looking weak and pathetic against the immense darkness of the night. Climbing down from the high cab, his legs felt unsteady, weak. The humid air clung to him like a wet blanket. The incessant buzz of jungle insects sounded unnervingly loud. He walked toward the front of the truck, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He kept the flashlight beam fixed on the ground, on the spot where the body lay. He rounded the massive grill of his engine, took 2 more steps, and stopped dead. He shone the light down. The road was wet with evening dew, but it was completely, utterly empty. He swept the beam frantically from side to side, across the asphalt, into the deep, leaf-choked ditch, up toward the dense wall of trees. There was nothing, no body, no blood, no sign that anything had ever been there. It couldn't be. He had seen it. He had seen the shape of a head, the tangle of limbs, the dark patch of clothing. He dropped to one knee, his hand hovering over the spot. He could still see the image in his mind, burned onto his retinas. He touched the pavement. It was cool and slightly damp, nothing more. A wave of vertigo washed over him. He was losing his mind. The stress, the long hours, the solitude. It had finally broken something inside him. He scrambled back to the cab, slamming the heavy door shut and fumbling with the lock. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass of the window, his breath fogging it up in ragged puffs. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. He turned the key, and the engine roared back to life, a comforting, mechanical beast waking from its slumber. As the air pressure for the brakes refilled, the radio on the dashboard suddenly sputtered. It wasn't static this time. A voice whispered from the speaker, a woman's voice, and she was crying. It was the sound of pure, inconsolable grief, a soft, ghostly weeping that seemed to come from somewhere very far away, yet it filled every corner of the small cab. It was a sound of utter despair. Somchai yelled, a raw, terrified sound. He slapped at the radio, twisting the volume knob, punching the power button. The weeping continued for 3 or 4 more seconds, impossibly, and then the radio went dead again. He sat there, frozen, his hand still on the silent radio. The last vestiges of his rational mind crumbled into dust. He was not tired. He was not hallucinating. He was in the presence of something deeply wrong. Zo, Smee, came the smell. The sweet perfume of jasmine was long gone, replaced by something vile. It started faintly, a metallic tang at the back of his throat. It grew stronger, blossoming into the thick, coppery stench of blood. Not fresh blood, but old, dried blood. A smell he knew from the aftermath of road accidents. He gagged, pulling the collar of his shirt over his nose, but the foul odor was already inside the cab, inescapable. He had to get out of there. He slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator, not caring about the strain on the engine. He just needed to move, to put this cursed curve behind him. He kept his eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to look at his mirrors, refusing to acknowledge the darkness behind him. He focused on the white lines, on the next turn, on anything but the cold dread that was now a living entity in the truck with him. But you can't outrun something that's already inside. A flicker of movement, to his right, in his peripheral vision. He couldn't help it. His head snapped to the side, his eyes darting to the passenger seat. The scream that had been building in his chest finally tore its way out. The seat was not empty. For a terrifying, eternal heartbeat, a woman was sitting there. She was a dark shape against the window, her form indistinct but solid. Her head was bowed, as if in prayer or shame, and a thick curtain of wet black hair hung down, completely obscuring her face. He couldn't see her features, but he could feel her presence, an aura of crushing sorrow and icy cold that radiated through the cab. He blinked, a single, violent, convulsive blink, and she was gone. The seat was empty. The fabric was undisturbed, but the cold remained, and Somchai knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that he was no longer the only one in his truck. She was with him now, and he was driving her away from her curve. Panic is a corrosive thing. It eats away at reason, leaving only raw, animal instinct. Somchai was no longer a professional driver. He was prey. The feeling of the phantom presence on his passenger seat was a physical weight, a chilling aura that seemed to suck all the warmth from the cab. He didn't dare look again. He didn't need to. He knew she was there. He began to pray, the words tumbling from his lips in a frantic, whispered litany. He prayed to the Buddha, to the spirit of the truck, to the guardians of the road. He begged his ancestors for protection. His voice was a low, desperate murmur, a thin shield against the terrifying silence. His foot was pressed hard on the accelerator. The old truck groaned, its engine screaming as it clawed its way up the inclines and hurtled down the slopes. The winding road was a blur of darkness and fleeting white lines. Every turn was a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. He had to get to a town, to see streetlights, to hear the sounds of other people, to escape the suffocating loneliness of this highway. He risked a glance in his rearview mirror, a reflexive action honed by years of driving. The road behind him was a black, empty void. For a second, a sliver of relief pierced his terror, but it was short-lived. Far in the distance, two tiny points of light appeared. They were faint, like stars, but they were growing, and they were growing fast. Another vehicle. On this road, at this hour, the odds were slim, but it was possible. Maybe it was another trucker who knew the shortcut. The lights grew brighter, closer, resolving into the distinct shape of headlights. But the speed, no sane person would drive that fast on the Serpent at night. The vehicle was eating up the distance between them with an unnatural velocity, as if the treacherous curves didn't exist for it. The lights filled his mirror, a blinding white glare that bleached all the color from his cab. The vehicle was right behind him now, a dark shape looming in the brightness. It was an old pickup truck, rusted and dented, riding his tail so aggressively. He thought it might drive right into his trailer. But then the horn blared. It wasn't the sharp, angry beep of a modern car. It was a deep, mournful, almost human cry, a sound that echoed through the hills and seemed to vibrate in Somchai's bones. He flinched, his truck swerving slightly. He corrected, trying to signal for the driver to pass. The pickup pulled out, its engine roaring, and drew level with his cab. Somchai risked a glance. The driver was a man. His face, illuminated in the eerie green glow of his own dashboard, was a pale, gaunt mask of fury. His eyes were dark, hollow pits, and they were fixed on Somchai with an expression of pure, cold hatred. Then sitting beside him, in the passenger seat, was the woman. He could see her clearly now. The wet hair, the white dress, the face streaked with dirt and dried blood. Her mouth was open in a silent, eternal scream. She lifted a hand, her movements slow and deliberate, and pointed a single accusing finger directly at Somchai. Before he could react, the pickup swerved violently. The world erupted in a deafening shriek of metal, grinding against metal. The pickup slammed into the side of Somchai's cab, the impact sending a violent jolt through the entire rig. Somchai yelled, wrestling with the steering wheel, as his truck was pushed toward the edge of the road. He could see the steep black drop into the jungle just meters away. He fought for control, pulling the wheel hard to the left. The pickup pulled away, then slammed into him again, this time further back against the trailer. The massive truck fishtailed, its tires losing purchase on the slick asphalt. Sumaichai's life didn't flash before his eyes. There was only the road, the wheel in his hands, and the desperate, burning need to survive. This was not a robbery. This was an execution. Through the chaos, through the blinding headlights, and the screaming metal, he saw light ahead. Around the next bend was a soft, steady glow, a roadside shrine. It was bigger than the others, lit not by candles, but by a string of electric bulbs, casting a small, warm circle of safety in the oppressive dark. It became his sanctuary. He didn't know why, but a desperate, primal instinct told him that the light was safety. If he could just reach the light, this would end. He ignored the gauges, ignored the screaming of his engine, and pushed the accelerator to the floor. The truck surged forward. The phantom pickup stayed with him, a relentless predator, scraping and grinding along the length of his trailer, trying to push him over the edge. Sumaichai's eyes were fixed on the approaching shrine. The pool of light grew larger. 20 meters. 10. As the front of his truck entered the circle of light, the world changed. The violent pressure against his trailer vanished. The horrendous sound of scraping metal ceased. The blinding headlights in his mirror were gone. He dared a look. The pickup truck was still there, alongside his trailer, but it was no longer solid. Its form was shimmering, transparent, like a heat haze on a summer road. The furious man behind the wheel and the screaming woman beside him were fading, their expressions of rage and sorrow dissolving into the night air. The entire truck veered away, became a whisper of smoke, and then was simply gone, swallowed by the darkness from which it came. Sumaichai's truck roared past the shrine. He drove another 100 meters before his mind caught up with his body. He slammed on the brakes, pulling the rig onto the narrow shoulder. He cut the engine. The silence was absolute. He sat in his seat, his entire body shaking with violent, uncontrollable tremors. He was drenched in sweat, yet he felt colder than he had ever felt in his life. He looked at the side of his truck in the mirror, expecting to see a ruin of torn metal, but the paint was smooth, unscratched. There was no dent, no scrape, no sign of the brutal assault. After 10 minutes that felt like a lifetime, he found the strength to move. He opened his door and practically fell out of the cab, his legs giving way beneath him. He leaned against a warm tire, dragging in deep, ragged gulps of air. Slowly, he turned and looked back at the shrine. He began to walk towards it, drawn by the light. It was a beautiful, well-cared-for structure of dark wood, and it was covered in offerings, and the air around it was thick with the sweet, powerful scent of jasmine. His eyes were drawn to the back of the shrine. There, protected from the elements, were 2 photographs. A young man with a kind, hopeful smile. A young woman, her face bright with love. They were the couple from the pickup truck. Below them, tacked to the wood, was a laminated newspaper clipping. The headline was stark: "Young couple killed in hit and run on Highway 4. His eyes scanned the text. It spoke of a tragedy 5 years prior. A local couple, on their way to visit the woman's mother, were run off the road by an unknown driver who never stopped. The article ended with a haunting detail. The woman had been an orchid farmer, but her favorite flowers were jasmine, and she had been carrying a fresh bouquet for her mother that night. The police found the fragrant white blossoms scattered all around the crash site, like fallen stars in the darkness. Sumaichai stood before the shrine, the garish light from the electric bulbs chasing away the shadows. The newspaper article felt heavy in his mind, heavier than any physical object. The details clicked into place, forming a picture of pure horror and tragedy. The woman on the side of the road, her wet hair, the jasmine, the man behind the wheel, his face a mask of rage. It hadn't been an attack. It had been a memory. He wasn't their target. He was just a witness, or worse, a participant in their never-ending nightmare. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to show him how they had died. Their spirits locked in a violent, repeating loop of their final, terrifying moments. In the darkness, his large truck must have looked like the one that had sent them careening into the jungle 5 years ago. The fear that had gripped him for hours began to recede, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. They weren't monsters. They were just 2 people whose lives had been stolen. 2 souls lost on a dark road, searching for a justice they would never receive. He walked slowly back to his truck. the adrenaline leaving him weak and hollow. He had nothing of value to offer them. No red Fanta, no incense. He looked around his cab and found a small, unopened bottle of drinking water and a sealed packet of rice crackers he'd been saving for the morning. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He returned to the shrine and placed his humble offerings carefully amongst the jasmine garlands and fruit. He pressed his palms together in the traditional way, bowed his head deeply, and spoke a quiet prayer into the night. He prayed for their peace. He asked them to forgive him for stumbling into their sorrow. He asked them to find their way to the next life, to leave this road behind. When he climbed back into the cab, the air felt different. The oppressive cold was gone. The foul stench of blood had vanished. The only scent was the sweet, gentle perfume of jasmine, drifting in from the shrine on the humid night air. It was no longer threatening, but sorrowful. He started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. As he drove away from the small circle of light, the first pale, gray hint of dawn was staining the eastern sky. The road ahead was no longer a terrifying void, but a path leading toward the morning. The rest of his drive was silent, peaceful, and blessedly uneventful. The serpent had let him go. Somchai was never the same again. He delivered his cargo on time, but the easygoing man who had left the depot 2 days earlier did not return. He was quiet, his eyes holding a haunted, distant look. His first action upon returning was to walk into the dispatcher's office. He told the man he would no longer be driving the Highway 4 route. Not once, not ever. He said he would sooner quit and find work on a fishing boat than drive that road at night again. The dispatcher, a veteran of the industry who had heard 1,000 stories from 1,000 drivers, saw the stark terror in Somchai's eyes and simply nodded. He changed the route, no questions asked. Somchai never told his wife the full story. He couldn't. How could he explain a terror that defied explanation? But he told a few old friends, men with the same road dust on their faces, in the quiet of a roadside cafe late one night. They listened without interruption, their expressions grim. When he finished, they didn't mock him or call him crazy. They just nodded slowly, and one of them told a story about a radio that played a child's lullaby on that same stretch, while another spoke of a sudden, inexplicable fog that smelled of flowers. Somchai's story became the new, definitive legend of the serpent, a whispered warning to new drivers to take the long way around. The experience left its mark in other ways. For the rest of his life, Somchai could not bear the scent of jasmine. A flower that once symbolized purity and respect now only triggered a cold knot of dread in his stomach, bringing back the memory of a pale, pointing finger and a face frozen in a silent scream. The events of that night, as terrifying as they were, are deeply woven into the spiritual fabric of Thailand. The spirit houses Somchai saw are called San Phra Phum. They are built not for ghosts, but as homes for the guardian spirits of the land. It's believed that every patch of earth has a spirit owner, and if you build on their land, you must provide them with a more beautiful home in return for their protection. On dangerous roads, they serve a dual purpose: to ask the local spirits for safe passage and to help pacify the restless souls of those who have died there. Thai folklore is filled with stories of Phai Thai Hong, the spirits of those who suffered a violent, sudden, or unjust death. Because of the trauma of their passing, their souls are unable to move on. They are believed to be trapped at the site of their death, sometimes replaying the event over and over, filled with confusion, anger, and a desperate need for resolution. These spirits can be dangerous, not always out of malice, but because their powerful, negative energy can affect the living, sometimes leading to more accidents in the same spot. The offerings of red-colored drinks, food, and flowers are meant to be sustenance for these spirits, to show them respect and calm their anger, hoping to ease their suffering and help them find peace. Of course, one could argue that what Somchai experienced was a product of the mind, that on a dark, lonely road, a fatigued driver suffering from highway hypnosis simply projected local ghost stories onto the shadows, that the disappearing woman, the phantom truck, were just waking dreams, terrifying hallucinations brought on by exhaustion. But for Somchai, and for the countless others who have felt that sudden cold spot or seen a fleeting shape in their headlights on a lonely road at night, the explanation is far simpler and far more terrifying. The world is older and stranger than we think, and not everyone who dies is truly gone. So what do you believe happened on that road? Was Somchai the victim of a dangerously tired mind, his subconscious projecting local legends onto the dark highway? Or did he truly drive through a ghostly reenactment, a tragic echo of a crime that remains unpunished? Have you ever felt an unexplainable presence on a lonely road at night? Share your own stories in the comments below. If you want to hear more true paranormal accounts from across Asia, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Join us next week as we investigate the chilling story of a haunted dormitory in Malaysia. Hey everyone, welcome back to Spirits of Asia. If you ever stayed in a hotel in Asia, you might know the feeling, that quiet unease when you first walk into the room. The air feels a little too still, the lighting just a little too dim, and for a moment you wonder how many people have come and gone before you. Some travelers laugh it off, but for others, there's a deep sense that hotels are more than just temporary shelters. They're places where countless lives, moments, and sometimes tragedies leave an imprint. Nowhere is that more true than in Hong Kong, a city where the old and the new sit side by side, where gleaming skyscrapers rise next to narrow alleys, and decades-old buildings. Space is limited, demand is high, and hotels, especially the older ones, carry layers of history that most guests never know about. But there's one detail in particular that Hong Kong locals always pay attention to when they check into a hotel room: the placement of mirrors. For most of us, a mirror is just a mirror, something you glance at before heading out, maybe checking your hair or adjusting your clothes. But in Chinese belief, mirrors are far more than reflective glass. They are said to be spiritual gateways, a surface that doesn't just bounce back your image, but one that can also reflect the unseen, the world of wandering spirits. That's why one of the most common warnings you will hear from older Hong Kong residents is this: never sleep with a mirror facing your bed. The belief goes like this: at night, when you're asleep, your body is at its weakest. Your spirit, sometimes called a hun in Chinese, is said to wander freely during dreams. If a mirror reflects your sleeping body, it can confuse your spirit, trapping it in the reflection. In worst cases, it's believed that wandering ghosts may use the mirror as a doorway to enter your space, disturbing your rest, or even latching onto you. Now, this might sound like folklore, but over the years, countless guests in Hong Kong hotels have reported experiences they can't explain, reflections that move on their own, figures that appear in the glass, or worse, seeing themselves doing things they weren't actually doing. Tonight, I want to share with you two true stories from Hong Kong hotels, both tied to mirrors placed dangerously close to the bed. These aren't urban legends. They were shared by real people who experienced them firsthand. And after the stories, I'll also explain why mirrors are treated with such caution in Chinese culture and how feng shui principles tie into these chilling encounters. So if you're traveling through Hong Kong or anywhere in Asia, and you find yourself in a hotel room with a mirror staring directly at your bed, you may want to think twice before turning off the lights. Let's dive into the first story. The first account comes from a Hong Kong office worker named Mr. Lung. He shared his experience on a Cantonese forum in the early 2000s. And it has since circulated among locals as one of the clearest examples of why people warn against mirrors in hotels. At the time, Mr. Lin was in his late 20s. He worked in Central as an accountant, putting in long hours every week, often staying late at the office. On Friday nights, he usually went out drinking with colleagues, grabbing late suppers in Lan Kwai Fong before heading home to Kowloon. But one particular weekend, he decided not to go back to his parents' flat. Instead, he wanted some time to himself. So, he booked a cheap hotel in Mong Kok, one of those older, budget-friendly places tucked away behind Nathan Road. These hotels weren't glamorous: small rooms, thin walls, the smell of smoke clinging to the hallways. But for Mr. Leung, it was fine. All he wanted was a place to rest after a long week. He checked in around 11 p.m. The receptionist barely looked up from the desk as she handed him the keycard. He took the lift up to the 7th floor, walked down a narrow corridor lined with identical doors, and unlocked his room. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The room was small, about the size of a typical Hong Kong bedroom, barely enough space for a double bed, a desk, and a small TV mounted on the wall. But as he dropped his bag on the chair, He noticed something immediately, a tall, full-length mirror mounted directly opposite the bed. He laughed under his breath. Bad feng shui, he thought. Remembering how his grandmother used to lecture about mirror placement, he told himself it didn't matter. He wasn't superstitious. He was tired. Still, the mirror made him uneasy. As he lay in bed scrolling through his phone, he found himself glancing at it more often than usual. Even in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, he could clearly see his own reflection. And sometimes, just for a split second, it looked like his reflection wasn't quite in sync. A blink that seemed a fraction too late. A head movement that felt slightly delayed. By 2 a.m., he finally drifted off to sleep. But at around 3:15 a.m., Mr. Leung woke suddenly. The air conditioner had gone silent. The room was uncomfortably still, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. He shifted under the blanket, rubbing his eyes, and then froze. In the mirror across from him, his reflection wasn't lying down. It was sitting upright on the bed. At first, he thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. He turned his head toward the mirror, but his body in reality was still flat on the mattress. The reflection remained sitting, its head slowly turning to face him. His heart pounded so hard, it felt like it would burst out of his chest. He squeezed his eyes shut, counting silently in his head, then opened them again. The reflection hadn't changed. His mouth twitched into what looked like the beginning of a smile. Without thinking, Mr. Leung shot up, yanked the blanket off his bed, and threw it over the mirror. He backed into the corner of the room, clutching his phone with trembling hands, too terrified to call anyone, too ashamed to run into the hallway in the middle of the night. He sat there until dawn, never once closing his eyes again. The next morning, exhausted and pale, he checked out. As he handed the keycard back, he muttered nervously to the receptionist, "You should really do something about the mirrors in those rooms. I saw something last night." The receptionist didn't look surprised. She just gave a tired half-smile and shook her head. In Cantonese, she said quietly, "That's why most guests ask us to cover the mirrors before they sleep." Mr. Leung never stayed in a Mongkok budget hotel again, and from that day forward, no matter where he traveled, Hong Kong, Macau, or abroad, he always checked the mirror placement in every room before unpacking his bag. The second case was shared by a woman named Angela, a business traveler from Malaysia. In 2017, she visited Hong Kong for a 3-day conference at a hotel ballroom in Tsim Sha Tsui Tsui. Like most professionals flying in for work, she booked a mid-range hotel nearby, close to Nathan Road, the kind of place popular with both tourists and corporate guests. When she checked into a room on the 12th floor, she immediately noticed the layout was strange. The bed was pressed against one wall, and just a few feet away, a large wall-mounted mirror ran almost the entire length of the opposite side. When she lay down, she could see herself, full body, staring back. Angela hesitated. She remembered her grandmother in Penang always warning against sleeping with mirrors facing the bed. They confused the spirit, her grandmother used to say, but Angela shrugged it off. It was late, she was exhausted, and she had to wake up early the next morning. She unpacked her suitcase, set her alarm, and switched off the lights. Sometime after 2:30 a.m., she woke to the sound of dripping water. At first, she thought it was coming from the bathroom, but when she sat up, the sound seemed to echo strangely. As if inside the room itself, she rubbed her eyes, glanced toward the mirror, and froze. In the reflection, she wasn't lying in bed anymore. She saw herself standing, right behind the headboard, hair hanging over her face. Angela's breath caught in her throat. She whipped her head around to check, but no one was there. The bed was empty, except for her own trembling body. Slowly, she turned her gaze back to the mirror. The figure was still there, standing motionless behind her reflection in bed. Then, the figure began to smile. It wasn't a normal smile. The lips stretched far too wide, the cheeks tightening unnaturally. The kind of grin that looked carved into the face rather than made by muscles. Angela scrambled for her phone, flicking on the flashlight. The beam hit the mirror, and instantly, the reflection corrected itself. She saw only her own wide-eyed face, pale and drenched in sweat. Heart racing, she switched on every light in the room. She left the TV on for background noise and stayed awake until dawn, sitting upright against the headboard. The next morning, she tried to convince herself it had been sleep paralysis or a dream, but when she met her colleague in the hotel cafe downstairs, She casually mentioned the experience. Her colleague's face drained of color. "You didn't sit here," she whispered. "Last year, a young woman ended her life in one of those rooms, right beside the mirror." Angela felt the blood drain from her body. She pushed her plate away, appetite gone. That evening, without a second thought, she went to the reception desk and asked to check out early. She didn't care about losing the room fee. She moved to a completely different hotel for the rest of her stay. Later, when she retold the story online, she said, "It wasn't just fear. It felt like the mirror itself wanted me to look, wanted me to notice her. I will never again sleep with a mirror beside my bed." So, what exactly is going on with these hotel mirrors? Were Mr. Long and Angela simply overtired, imagining things in the middle of the night? Or is there something deeper at play in Hong Kong's cultural beliefs? To understand, we need to look at how mirrors are seen in Chinese tradition. In Chinese folklore, mirrors aren't just reflective objects. They are believed to be spiritual gateways. Their smooth surfaces are said to blur the line between the physical and spiritual worlds, allowing ghosts to appear or even to travel through. This is why you'll often hear older generations say things like, "Don't place a mirror facing your bed or cover mirrors during funerals." The reasoning is simple. When you're asleep, your body is resting, but your spirit, often referred to as the hum, is thought to wander freely. If your soul sees itself in a mirror during this time, it can become trapped or confused, unable to return to your body. That's why people say mirrors can steal your spirit if they face the bed. In Hong Kong, this belief is particularly strong in older generations who grew up hearing stories of mirrors reflecting not just people, but also shadows, figures, or scenes that don't belong to the living world. Beyond folklore, mirrors also carry a powerful role in feng shui, the Chinese practice of arranging spaces for harmony and energy flow. In feng shui, mirrors are considered tools that can amplify or redirect energy. Placed in the wrong spot, especially facing the bed, mirrors are believed to cause restlessness, insomnia, and even health problems. Feng Shui masters often warn that a mirror reflecting your sleeping body doubles the energy of the person, creating a symbolic third presence in the room. In a hotel, where countless people have slept before you, some passing away, some carrying emotional turmoil, that third presence may not always be friendly. This is why in Hong Kong, it's common for locals to request hotel staff to cover mirrors with a cloth or towel before sleeping. In fact, some hotels quietly keep spare cloths at the reception just for this reason, even though they don't advertise it. There's another layer to this belief that ties directly to death rituals. In many Chinese households, when someone passes away, all the mirrors in the home are covered. Elders say it's to prevent the spirit of the deceased from seeing themselves in the glass and becoming trapped. Others say it prevents the living from accidentally glimpsing the ghost of the deceased behind them in the reflection. This practice reveals just how deep the fear of mirrors runs. They're not just decoration, they're considered active participants in the spiritual environment of a space. Now imagine this in the context of hotels. Unlike a family home, a hotel room sees countless occupants. People sleep there, fight there, cry there, and yes, sometimes even die there. Each room accumulates layers of human energy, some of it peaceful, some of it troubled. A mirror in such a space isn't just reflecting the latest guest, it might be reflecting what has lingered from those before. Hotels in Hong Kong, especially the older ones in areas like Mong Kok, Yau Ma Tei, Intin Sha Tu, Sui, are notorious for being spiritually heavy. The reasons are both practical and cultural. Hundreds of guests cycle through the same rooms every month. Unfortunately, hotels are often sites of tragedy, including suicides. These events may never be disclosed to future guests. Hong Kong's extreme density means buildings are layered with histories, sometimes built on sites of burial grounds or areas tied to past tragedies, like fires or wartime deaths. Combine all of this with mirrors positioned poorly, often for convenience or aesthetics rather than feng shui, and you get the perfect recipe for unsettling encounters. In traditional belief, this would be seen as his hun, being partially drawn out by the mirror, creating a disconnection between body and soul. The smile he saw wasn't his own. It may have been something else mimicking his image. This aligns with another common belief, that mirrors can hold onto the images of the deceased. Locals in Tin Shai Tsui still whisper about the woman who ended her life in that hotel room. Whether Angela saw her spirit or her own reflection possessed by that lingering energy, the outcome was the same: terror and flight. Ask anyone in Hong Kong who takes these beliefs seriously, and they still tell you, if a mirror faces the bed, cover it with a towel or cloth before sleeping. If you wake in the night and see something unusual in the glass, do not stare at it. Immediately look away or cover it. If possible, request a room change if the mirror placement feels uncomfortable. Many seasoned travelers in Asia already do this instinctively. Some even carry lightweight cloths in their luggage just for hotel mirrors. Though tonight's stories are from Hong Kong, the fear of mirrors is widespread across Asia. In Japan, there are similar beliefs that mirrors can trap souls. In Thailand, mirrors are sometimes avoided in bedrooms for the same reasons. And in Malaysia, elders often tell children not to look into mirrors at night, especially after midnight, when spirits are said to be most active. So after hearing both of these stories, Mr. Leong in Mongkok and Angela in Simsha Tsui, the question remains, what exactly happened to them? Skeptics might argue that it was exhaustion, stress, or the mind playing tricks in the early hours of the morning. After all, 3 a.m., often called the ghost hour in Chinese belief, is the time when yin energy is at its peak and the human body is most vulnerable. If you're already tired or uneasy, it's easy to imagine things. But here sits the problem. These experiences are not isolated. They follow a very specific pattern repeated in countless Hong Kong hotel encounters. Waking between 3 and 4 a.m., seeing a reflection that does not match reality, feeling an unnatural heaviness in the air, as if someone else is present in the room. The relief only coming when the mirror is covered or when the lights are switched on. For believers, this is no coincidence. In fact, it strengthens the idea that mirrors are more than just glass. They are thresholds, reflective surfaces that can either safeguard or endanger, depending on how they're positioned. Part of what makes these accounts so powerful is that they're not happening to ghost hunters or thrill seekers. These are everyday people. An accountant just looking for a quiet night, a businesswoman in town for a conference. Neither of them went searching for the supernatural. Instead, the supernatural found them. That's a core theme in many Asian ghost stories. The idea that spirits are everywhere, woven into daily life, waiting for the right moment or the wrong circumstance to reveal themselves. And in places like hotels, where death, loneliness, and desperation sometimes leave invisible marks, those circumstances arise more often than we realize. There's an old Cantonese saying, Yan yong ching, guai yong ge, yong kai yong ge, yan zhong kai yong ge, yong kai yong ge, yan zhong kai yong ge, yan zhong kai yong ge, yan kai yong ge, yan zhong 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 kai yong ge. This belief shapes how many Hong Kong locals interact with mirrors even today. Some families keep mirrors away from bedrooms entirely. Others ensure that any mirror that can reflect a bed is covered at night. Travelers from Hong Kong and Taiwan often carry lightweight scarves or towels in their luggage, not for comfort, but as spiritual protection in case the hotel room's layout feels wrong. Even if you strip away the spiritual beliefs, there's something psychologically unsettling about sleeping in front of a mirror. Studies in sleep psychology suggest that reflective surfaces can increase anxiety at night because our brains pick up movement, even if it's just our own reflection, and interpret it as a threat. Add to that the dim lighting, the silence of hotel rooms, and the knowledge that many hotels have been sites of tragedy, and it becomes easier to understand why so many people report similar experiences. But for those who believe in the unseen, there's no need for scientific explanation. The stories of Mr. Leong and Angela are simply two more confirmations of what elders have been saying for generations. Never sleep with a mirror facing your bed. Hotels in Hong Kong, from budget guest houses in Mongkok to business hotels in Simsha Tsui, all share one thing in common: layers of history. Every room has seen dozens, maybe hundreds of lives pass through. Most of those stays are ordinary, but every now and then something lingers. And when that lingering energy has a mirror to anchor itself, guests may end up facing more than just their own reflection. So, if you ever find yourself traveling through Asia, take a moment to look around your hotel room. Check where the mirrors are, and if one happens to be staring at you from across the bed, do what locals do, cover it before you close your eyes. Because sometimes, it's not just you who's looking back. Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight, we're diving into one of the oldest warnings you'll hear in Asia. Never ever pick up strangers past midnight. Whether you're driving a taxi, a bus, or just heading home from work, the stories are everywhere. Drivers who stop for the wrong passenger at the wrong time don't just regret it, they often never forget it. The story I'm about to share tonight comes from a taxi driver in Malaysia. This isn't a friend of a friend rumor, not a ghost tale passed around the internet. This was an incident reported directly by the driver himself, and even years later, he still refuses to drive the late shift. Let's start from the beginning. The driver's name was Raymond. At the time of this story, he was in his early 40s and had been working as a taxi driver in Kuala Lumpur for almost 2 decades. He wasn't new, not some rookie, just learning the ropes. He knew the city better than most people know their own neighborhoods. Every shortcut, every back alley, every spot where he could find a quick bite after midnight, this was his territory. Driving at night had always been his preference. Fewer cars on the road, less stress from traffic, and the fares were usually higher because nighttime passengers tipped more generously. Plus, the nightlife crowd often meant easy business. People heading home from bars, karaoke, or night markets. But late-night driving also came with its share of risks, robberies, drunk passengers, and of course, the stories. Every Malaysian driver had heard them. Spirits on the roadside, passengers who vanish before you reach the destination, shadows in the back seat when no one should be there. Raymond always laughed them off. He believed in ghosts, sure, but he figured as long as he minded his own business, they wouldn't bother him. That changed one night, in 2006. It was a Friday, just after 1 a.m. The streets of Kuala Lumpur were quieter than usual. Raymond was cruising along the Jalan Ampang, near the outskirts of the city, hoping for one last passenger before heading home. That's when he saw her. A woman was standing by the side of the road. She wasn't at a bus stop, not near a shop, just there, half hidden under a flickering streetlight. She wore a white blouse and a long dark skirt, her hair falling past her shoulders. From a distance, she looked like any other late-night commuter waiting for a ride. She raised her hands slightly as his taxi approached. Raymond hesitated. Something about the way she stood there felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. But business was business. He slowed down, pulled up beside her, and rolled down the window. "Miss, do you need a ride?" he asked. The woman nodded, her voice soft but clear. "Yes. Can you take me to Chures?" Chures was a residential district, about 20 minutes away. Not far, not too isolated, seemed safe enough. Raymond unlocked the door, and the woman slid into the back seat. The first thing he noticed was the smell. A faint scent of jasmine filled the car, sweet but oddly heavy, the kind of fragrance you'd expect at a funeral wake, not on a passenger heading home. He glanced at her through the rearview mirror. She was staring straight ahead, hands folded neatly on her lap, expression blank. Raymond tried to make small talk, the way drivers usually do. "Late night, huh? Coming back from work?" The woman didn't answer. She didn't even look at him, just kept staring at the windshield, as if she wasn't really there. That's when his unease started to grow. Something about her silence felt unnatural. Most women traveling alone at night were either cautious, avoiding conversation, or chatty, trying to ease the tension. But this passenger was different. It was as if she didn't even register that someone else was in the car. Raymond tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He told himself not to overthink. Just get her to Cheris, collect the fare, and call it a night. But halfway through the ride, things took a turn. They were passing through a quieter stretch of road when Raymond caught sight of something in the mirror. For just a second, he thought he saw her reflection smiling back at him, not her actual face. A reflection. Her real face was still blank, emotionless, but the reflection in the mirror, it smiled, wide, unnatural. Raymond's blood ran cold. He almost slammed the brakes right there. He forced himself to look again, but by then, the reflection was back to normal, the same blank expression. He told himself it was fatigue, a trick of the light, but deep down, he knew better. As they entered Cheras, the woman finally spoke again. Her voice was quiet, almost like a whisper. "Stop here." Raymond slowed down, confused. They weren't near any houses, just a dark road lined with old trees. No lights, no people, nothing but shadows stretching across the asphalt. "Miss, are you sure? There's nothing here," he said. "Stop," she repeated, firmer this time. Raymond's instincts screamed at him not to, but he pulled over. The woman reached into her skirt pocket and pulled out a folded bill. She placed it gently on the seat beside her, then opened the door and stepped out. She didn't walk toward the trees or down the road. She didn't move at all. She just stood there, facing away from him, hair swaying slightly in the night breeze. Raymond waited for her to leave, but she didn't. After a full minute, unease turned to fear. He reached over and grabbed the bill she'd left behind. That's when he realized it wasn't stuffing money at all. It was a hell bank note, the kind of joss paper burned for the dead during Chinese funerals. Raymond's stomach dropped. He looked up at the roadside. Again, heart pounding. The woman was gone. Just seconds earlier, she had been standing right there. Now the roadside was empty. Raymond's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. He slammed the car into gear and sped off, the scent of jasmine still lingering in the back seat. For days after that incident, Raymond refused to drive at night. He showed the note to his wife, who told him immediately to burn it as an offering, along with incense, to release the spirit. He did, but he never forgot the way that reflection smiled at him in the mirror. Years later, when he finally shared his story with other drivers, he realized this encounter wasn't unique. Dozens of other late-shift drivers in Kuala Lumpur, Penang, even across the border in Thailand and Singapore, had nearly identical stories. A lone woman on the roadside, usually past midnight, always dressed in pale clothing. They accept the ride, stay unnervingly quiet, and pay with funeral money before vanishing into thin air. Locals have a name for her, the Midnight Passenger. Some say she's the restless soul of a woman who died in a road accident decades ago, forever trying to get home. Others believe she's not one ghost, but many different spirits taking the same form to trick the living into acknowledging them. Raymond doesn't care which it is. All he knows is that the warning is true. Never pick up strangers past midnight. And as chilling as Raymond's story is, it isn't the only one. In fact, across Asia, from Thailand to the Philippines, from Hong Kong to Japan, countless drivers have reported almost the same thing. Some survive with only a terrifying memory. Others aren't so lucky. Our second story tonight comes from Thailand, a country where ghost beliefs are deeply rooted in daily life. This one is about a minibus driver who made the mistake of stopping for the wrong passengers on the wrong night. It was 2013 in Chiang Mai. The driver, Somchai, was working the late route from the city back to the rural outskirts. Minibuses there operate like shared taxis, picking up passengers along the way. That night, his vehicle was already half full when he saw two figures at the side of the road waving him down. A man and a woman, both dressed in old-fashioned clothes, like something from the 1970s. The man wore a collared shirt tucked into slacks, and the woman had on a floral dress with puffed sleeves. They looked out of place, but Somchai didn't think much of it. He slowed down and let them board. The other passengers inside were silent. As the couple climbed in, they sat toward the back, smiling faintly, but never speaking. At first, everything seemed normal. Somchai drove on, collecting fares along the way. But after a while, he realized something strange. Every time he glanced in the rearview mirror, the seats where the couple sat looked empty. He could see the other passengers clearly, but when his eyes shifted to the back row, there was nothing there, just two empty seats. Yet, when he looked directly, turning his head, the couple was still there, staring at him, smiling. Somchai's grip tightened on the wheel. He tried to focus on the road, but the unease spread through the bus. The other passengers noticed too. Some whispered prayers under their breath. One elderly woman even clutched her amulet and shut her eyes. The bus grew heavier, as if the air itself thickened. The temperature dropped. Then came the smell. Well, not jasmine this time, but something sour, the unmistakable stench of decay. Somchai couldn't stake it anymore. He slammed on the brakes and shouted, Out. Everyone out. The passengers didn't hesitate. They scrambled off the bus, some stumbling in their haste. Some shy turned back toward the rear seats. Empty. No couple. No one. The next morning, he took the bus to be blessed by a monk. He later learned that decades earlier, a young couple had died in an accident on that very road. Their bodies were never properly cremated, and locals believed their spirits lingered, latching onto passing vehicles in search of company. From that night on, Songchai refused to pick up passengers past midnight. Even now, he warns younger drivers, if you see someone waving you down after the last hour, keep driving, don't look back. But here's the thing, not all stories end with the driver escaping. Some take a much darker turn, where the line between life and death blurs completely. And that's exactly what happened to a taxi driver in Hong Kong, whose story remains one of the most disturbing accounts I've ever come across. Raymond's story in Malaysia and Songchai's encounter in Thailand were terrifying enough, but both men survived to tell their tales. The story I'm about to share now, from Hong Kong, is darker. It raises a chilling question. What happens when a driver doesn't make it out alive? This account comes from another taxi driver, Mr. Lee, who worked a night shift in Kowloon during the late 1990s. At the time, taxi driving was one of the most common jobs for middle-aged men in Hong Kong. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and there was always demand. Late-night taxis were especially popular because many neighborhoods didn't have convenient bus routes after midnight. But those same hours carried risks. Drivers often worked alone, navigating narrow roads, dimly lit industrial areas, or long stretches near cemeteries and old buildings, places locals already whispered about being haunted. Mr. Lee was a seasoned driver, not someone easily rattled. He'd heard all the ghost stories other cabbies passed around in tea shops, but he never paid them much attention until one night when he picked up a passenger near the old Lai Chi Kok Hospital, a site long rumored to be haunted. It was just after 2 a.m. The roads were quiet, and the glow of the city lights had faded into the distance. Mr. Lee spotted a woman standing by the roadside. She wore a cheongsam, the traditional Chinese dress, though the style looked outdated, like something from decades earlier. She waved, and he stopped. "Where to?" he asked, rolling down the window. Her voice was soft. "Shikip Mei." That was a residential district, not far away. He nodded, unlocked the door, and let her in. From the moment she sat down, something felt strange. Her skin was pale, almost gray under the streetlights, and her perfume was overpowering. It wasn't unpleasant. It smelled of roses, but it filled the entire car, cloying and suffocating. As he drove, Mr. Lee tried to glance at her in the rearview mirror, but every time he looked up, he couldn't see her reflection. The seat was empty in the mirror, even though he could feel her presence behind him. His palms grew sweaty on the steering wheel. He forced himself to focus on the road, telling himself he was imagining it. When they reached Shikip Mei, the woman leaned forward slightly. "Here," she said. He pulled over. She placed the folded bill on the seat and quietly stepped out. Without another word, she vanished into the shadows between two buildings. Mr. Lee exhaled in relief. He grabbed the bill to put it into his fare pouch, only to freeze. It wasn't Hong Kong dollars. It was an old paper note, yellowed and brittle, the kind burned as offerings for the dead. His stomach twisted. He slammed the car into gear and sped away, heart pounding, the scent of roses still lingering. The next day, when he opened his wallet, the note was gone. In its place was a strip of burnt ash. Mr. Lee told a few close colleagues what happened, and they urged him to get his taxi blessed at a temple. He agreed, but he never drove that late-night route again. He also started refusing female passengers dressed in white or traditional clothing past midnight. He wasn't taking any chances. But here's steps where the story turns chilling. Months later, another driver claimed had picked up the same woman near Lai Chi Kok. Only this time, the story didn't end with just a bill. According to his family, the driver never returned home that night. His taxi was later found abandoned near a cemetery. The engine was still running, headlights on, but the car was empty. The driver's body was discovered 2 days later in a wooded area nearby. His expression was twisted in terror, eyes wide open, as if he had seen something unspeakable. The official report listed no foul play, no signs of injury, just sudden death. Some called it a heart attack. Others whispered it was the same passenger, the ghost woman who had claimed another victim. And that's why, even today, Hong Kong taxi drivers pass around the same warning. If you see a lone woman in white standing by the roadside after midnight, do not stop. But this phenomenon isn't just tied to Hong Kong, Malaysia, or Thailand. Similar stories exist across Asia, from the Philippines to Japan. The idea of a phantom passenger is so common it almost feels universal, each culture shaping the details in its own way. Take Japan, for instance. There's a well-known tale from Tohoku, in northern Japan, that surfaced after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. Many taxi drivers in the region reported picking up passengers who vanished mid-ride. One driver recalled a young woman who asked to be taken to a nearby district that had been completely destroyed by the tsunami. When he explained the area no longer existed, she looked confused and whispered, "Am I dead?" before disappearing. Another driver recounted a man who got into his cab, soaking wet, asking to be driven to the coast. Halfway through the ride, the back seat was suddenly empty, though the seat itself was still damp. These accounts were so numerous that researchers at Tohoku University actually conducted interviews with drivers, documenting their stories as part of a study on grief and collective trauma. The drivers swore they weren't hallucinating. They believed the spirits of tsunami victims were still trying to get home, using the taxis as a bridge between worlds. The Philippines has its own version too, often tied to jeepney drivers. There are stories of passengers who board late at night, sit silently, and vanish before reaching the destination. One of the most famous tales involves a passenger whose reflection doesn't appear in the rearview mirror. The driver only realizes too late that he's been carrying a spirit. Even Singapore, with its ultra-modern image, has whispered accounts of late-night cab rides gone wrong. One infamous case tells of a driver who picked up a woman near Old Changi Hospital, a site notorious for being haunted. She directed him toward a cemetery. When he turned to ask for payment, the backseat was empty, but a handful of joss paper lay scattered across the upholstery. So why did these stories repeat across so many cultures, so many countries, with such similar details? Some believe it has to do with the liminality of travel. Roads, vehicles, and transit spaces are all in between places, not quite home, not quite destination. In spiritual traditions across Asia, such liminal spaces are thought to attract wandering souls, especially those who died suddenly or violently. They linger, unable to move on, and sometimes they hitch a ride. Others argue it's tied to cultural taboos about midnight. In Chinese belief, 3 a.m. is considered the ghost hour, when yin energy is strongest and spirits are most active. In Thai superstition, ghosts are often said to appear at crossroads or isolated stretches of road. In Japan, the witching hour is linked to spirits crossing into the human world. Driving alone past midnight combines all of these dangers. The driver is tired, vulnerable, and traveling through liminal spaces at the very hour when spirits are believed to be strongest. And yet, despite all the warnings, drivers still stop, sometimes out of habit, sometimes out of compassion, and sometimes simply because it's their job. But as the stories show, one wrong passenger can change everything. Now, the final account I want to share tonight is one of the most disturbing of all. It comes from a bus driver in the Philippines whose experience not only terrified him, but left the entire town talking for years afterward. Unlike the other stories, this one didn't end with just a vanished passenger. It ended with an entire bus full of people who weren't what they seemed. The Philippines is home to some of the most chilling roadside legends in Asia, many of them tied to jeepneys, buses, and long provincial highways. The story I'm about to share comes from the late 1980s, from a driver named Ernesto, who worked the late-night bus route between Manila and Pampanga. At the time, Ernesto was in his 30s. Driving buses wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough to support his young family. He was used to long hours, tight schedules, and the occasional rowdy passenger. What he wasn't prepared for was the night he realized not everyone who boarded his bus was alive. It was close to 1:30 a.m. when it began. The bus was mostly empty, just a handful of passengers scattered across the seats, dozing quietly as the vehicle hummed along the dark provincial road. Streetlights were few and far between. The only glow came from the dim yellow bulbs inside the bus and the occasional passing truck. As Ernesto rounded a bend, he saw 3 figures standing by the roadside. They were waving. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in plain clothes. Nothing unusual. He slowed down. In those days, it wasn't uncommon for people to wait along rural roads and flag down public buses instead of going to a terminal. The trio climbed aboard. They didn't speak much, only muttered thanks, and went to sit at the back. Ernesto thought nothing of it and continued driving. But soon, he noticed something strange. Every time he checked his rearview mirror, he saw fewer passengers than he knew were on the bus. At first, he dismissed it. Maybe the dim lighting was making it hard to see. But the more he looked, the clearer it became. There should have been at least 10 people on board. In the mirror, he saw only 5, and the new trio nowhere to be seen. He risked a quick glance over his shoulder. They were still there, sitting in the back, staring straight ahead, their faces oddly blank. A chill crawled up Ernesto's spine. He tried to shake it off, gripping the wheel tighter. Minutes passed. Then the bus grew colder. He could see his own breath, fogging in front of him. That made no sense. It was the middle of a humid Philippine night. The air conditioning wasn't even on. That's when one of the older women sitting near the front began muttering a prayer under her breath, clutching her rosary beads so tightly her knuckles turned white. Ernesto glanced at her in the mirror. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked. She didn't instead answer. She just kept praying. Then another passenger, a young man seated in the middle rows, suddenly shouted, "Driver, don't stop again. Don't stop for anyone." His voice cracked with fear. Ernesto's heart pounded. He didn't want to believe it, but he knew something wasn't right. He kept driving, refusing to look in the mirror again. The silence on the bus was suffocating, broken only by the rattle of the engine and the whispered prayers of the old woman. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the outskirts of town, where a small roadside chapel stood illuminated by a single light. Ernesto pulled over without hesitation. "Everyone off," he said firmly. The passengers didn't argue. They hurried out, one by one, gathering around the chapel. But when Ernesto did a final head count, his blood ran cold. 3 people were missing. The very same trio he had picked up earlier. No one saw them leave. They had simply vanished. The old woman explained what she saw. She said the 3 passengers never had shadows when they boarded. She also swore she noticed their feet weren't touching the floor as they walked down the aisle. They were hovering, just slightly, as if their bodies weren't fully there. Word of the incident spread quickly through town. Some said the trio were spirits of accident victims who had died on that road years earlier. Others believed they were lost souls, forever searching for a way home, hitching rides from unsuspecting drivers. Ernesto never forgot that night. For the rest of his career, he carried a small vial of holy water and a crucifix hanging from his rearview mirror. He still drove late-night routes. He had to for his livelihood, but he swore never again to stop for roadside strangers past midnight. And he wasn't Seth the only one. In fact, when I began researching these stories, I noticed something interesting. Almost every driver who has had a supernatural encounter on the road ends up changing their behavior in some way. Some stop driving night shifts altogether. Some carry religious talismans, charms, or protective amulets. Others make firm personal rules, like never picking up lone women, never stopping by cemeteries, or refusing to take passengers to certain areas after dark. These rules aren't written down anywhere. They're not in taxi manuals or bus company guidelines. They exist only as whispers among drivers, passed down like survival secrets, and the more you listen, the more consistent they are across Asia. Malaysia, Thailand, Hong Kong, Japan, the Philippines, Singapore, they all carry the same underlying warning. The road is never truly empty, and not everyone who waves you down is alive. So what I'm say explanation. Skeptics argue it's exhaustion. Drivers working long hours at night are prone to hallucinations brought on by fatigue, stress, or sleep deprivation. They point to tricks of the light, reflections in mirrors, even carbon monoxide poisoning as possible causes. But for those who have lived through these encounters, no scientific theory is enough to erase the memory of the scent of jasmine, the feel of icy air, or the sight of a passenger vanishing before their eyes. Some folklore suggests these stories endure because they serve as cultural warnings. They teach caution. Don't drive too late. Don't travel alone at night. Don't let greed for one last fare override your instincts. Others believe they're rooted in real spiritual traditions. that wandering spirits really do linger by roadsides, waiting for someone to give them a ride, even if just for a moment. Personally, I think the answer lies somewhere in between. Folklore often grows from real experiences. Maybe not every story is true, but when so many drivers across different countries, cultures, and decades report the same thing, it makes you wonder. So the next time you're driving home late at night and you see someone standing by the roadside past midnight, think carefully before you stop. Because in Asia, one of the oldest and most repeated warnings still holds true. Never pick up strangers past midnight. Thanks for joining me tonight. If you've ever heard similar stories from your own country or even experienced something firsthand, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Until then, drive safe and we'll meet again next video. Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight, we're diving into a place most of us would never want to set foot in, abandoned hospitals. Think about it for a second. Hospitals are already heavy with emotion. They're places of life and death, where people take their first breath and sometimes their last. Imagine all of that energy trapped inside walls that are later left to rot. Long hallways, peeling paint, broken stretchers, still sitting in the corridors, charts left behind with names that no one remembers anymore. Now, picture wandering those halls after dark, with nothing but a flashlight and the sound of your own footsteps. It's not just unsettling, it's dangerous. Across Asia, abandoned hospitals are some of the most haunted places you can find, from Thailand to the Philippines. Stories of people who've dared to explore them at night almost always end the same way. They leave shaken, terrified, sometimes never quite the same again. Tonight, I'll be sharing two true stories. One, the first takes us deep into Thailand, where a group of urban explorers entered a hospital that locals had warned them about for years. A hospital with a reputation so dark that even security guards refused to go near it after sundown. The second comes from the Philippines, where a young nurse, curious about the abandoned facility she once trained in, decided to revisit it at night with friends. What she encountered inside still gives her nightmares to this day. Both of these stories are based on real events, passed down by people who lived through them, and after you hear them, you'll understand why locals say abandoned hospitals are never truly empty. So turn off the lights, settle in, and let's step into the first story. The first story takes us to central Thailand, to a small provincial town about 2 hours outside of Bangkok. The hospital at the center of this story had been shut down for more than 20 years. Locals called it cursed. They said it had been built on land with bad feng shui, and from the very beginning it was plagued with tragedy. Patients who should have recovered passed away suddenly. Equipment failed without explanation. Doctors quit within months of starting. By the late 1990s, the hospital closed its doors for good, and the building was left to decay. Over time, nature crept in. Trees pushed their way through the cracks, vines crawled up the walls, and windows shattered in storms. But what really cemented its reputation as haunted were the stories. A taxi driver swore he saw a woman in a white hospital gown waving for help at the second-floor window late at night, but when he slowed down, there was no one there. A group of night watchmen once claimed they heard gurney wheels rolling down the hallway on their own, and more than one villager said they heard babies crying from the maternity ward, even though the place had been empty for decades. Most people in town avoided the hospital completely. Even during the day, they wouldn't go near it. But for a group of young urban explorers in 2012, that reputation was exactly what drew them in. There were 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women, all in their early 20s, all students from Bangkok, who had heard about the hospital online. They wanted to see it for themselves, film the experience, and prove they had the courage to spend a night there. They arrived just before sunset, driving up a cracked road lined with overgrown grass. The building loomed ahead. 5 stories tall, its paint faded to gray, its windows like empty eyes. The front doors were gone, replaced with a yawning black entrance. Already the air felt heavier, thicker, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Inside, the floors were littered with debris, broken tiles, scattered medical charts, even old IV stands rusting in the corners, their flashlights cut through the dust. illuminating faded posters on the walls warning about tuberculosis and dengue fever. It felt like walking into a time capsule of disease and despair. At first, the group was excited, laughing nervously, filming themselves as they explored. They made their way through the reception area, past rows of broken plastic chairs, and into the wards where beds were still lined up against the walls. They joked about who would be brave enough to lie down in one, but no one actually did. As night fell, the mood began to change. The corridors seemed longer, the shadows thicker. Their laughter grew quieter. Around 10 p.m., they decided to set up camp in what used to be the maternity ward. It was on the 3rd floor, a large room with several smaller rooms branching off. They spread out their mats, opened some snacks, and tried to relax. That's when one of them, a guy named Ton, decided to take a photo. He aimed his camera down the hallway, joking that maybe he'd catch a ghost. When he looked at the screen, his smile faded. In the photo, at the far end of the hallway, was a figure, a woman in a hospital gown, her hair long and black, her face obscured in shadow. The others crowded around. Some laughed nervously, saying it was just a trick of the light, but when they shone their flashlights down the hall, it was empty. No one there. Still, the mood had shifted. The air felt colder. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. They decided to stick together as they continued exploring. On the 4th floor, they found the old operating rooms. Rusted surgical tables stood under broken ceiling lamps. The walls were stained, the smell of mildew stronger than ever. As they filmed, they began to hear faint sounds. The metallic clatter of instruments, the squeak of wheels, as if trolleys were being pushed down the hall. They froze, listening. The sounds grew louder, coming closer, until they were right outside the door. Tong yanked the door open, shining his light into the hallway. Nothing, just silence. But the moment he stepped back inside, the sound started again. This time inside the room with them, the metallic clink of tools being dropped onto a tray. They turned their flashlights toward the surgical table. He turned their flashlights toward the surgical table. For a split second, they saw it, a figure in a surgical mask, leaning over the table, hands moving quickly, as if preparing for an operation. Then it was gone. The table was empty. Panic spread through the group. One of the women, May, insisted they leave immediately, but the others argued that it was just their imagination, that they had come all this way and couldn't back out now. Reluctantly, they agreed to stay until midnight. Back in the maternity ward, they tried to calm themselves, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Around 11:30, May heard something, the sound of crying, soft, faint, like a newborn. She froze, her skin crawling. The others went quiet too. The sound grew louder, filling the room. They followed it to one of the smaller side rooms. Inside, the floor was littered with broken cribs. The crying was loud now, echoing off the walls. One of the guys, Laking, raised his flashlight and screamed. In one of the cribs, there was a baby, small, pale, its eyes shut tight, wailing in the dark. And standing over it was the same woman from the photo, her hair hanging over her face, her gown stained with something dark. She turned toward them slowly, and in that instant, they saw her eyes, empty sockets, black and hollow. The group bolted. They didn't care about their gear, their cameras, or their mats. They ran down the stairs, their footsteps echoing like gunshots. Behind them, the crying grew louder, turning into a chorus of wails that followed them floor after floor. By the time they reached the ground level, the sound was deafening. They burst out into the humid night air, sprinting to their car. They didn't stop until they were miles away, their hearts pounding, their breaths ragged. None of them spoke for a long time. When they finally did, they all agreed on one thing: they would never go back. Later, when they looked through their footage, most of it was blurry, the audio filled with static. But in one clip, just before they ran, they caught something chilling. A woman's Sid's voice, low and strained, whispering in Thai, "Don't sit, leave me here." The group never posted the full video. Only a few clips circulated online, but their story spread through forums and local gossip. Today, the hospital still stands, its windows shattered, its walls covered in graffiti. Locals continue to avoid it, saying the spirits inside grow restless at night, searching for anyone foolish enough to enter. The second story takes us to the Philippines, to an old provincial hospital just outside Manila. This one had a very different history. It was originally built in the 1950s and served as a charity hospital for decades. Thousands of people passed through its doors, many of them poor families who couldn't afford treatment anywhere else. It was always overcrowded, understaffed, and underfunded. By the early 2000s, it was shut down after a new modern hospital was built nearby. The old building was abandoned, left to rot in the tropical heat. Over time, the stories began. Locals said they heard screams at night, especially from the emergency ward. Taxi drivers avoided the street in front of the hospital, saying they sometimes saw figures standing in the road that vanished when headlights hit them. Families who lived nearby swore that shadows moved across the windows, even though the building was empty. Some even claimed that on stormy nights, the hospital lights flickered on by themselves, even though the power had been cut years ago. Our story comes from a woman named Arlene. She was in her late 20s, a nurse who had actually trained in that very hospital before it shut down. She remembered it well, the long crowded hallways, the patients packed into beds 2 by 2, the sound of crying children echoing through the wards. Years later, when she was already working in Manila, she often drove past the old hospital on her way home. It always gave her chills, but also a strange pull, like the building wasn't done with her. One night, some friends convinced her to explore it with them. They were curious, just like so many others who had heard the stories. Arlene hesitated. She knew firsthand how much suffering had taken place inside, but eventually she agreed. There were 4 of them in total, 2 women and 2 men. They brought flashlights, snacks, and even a Bluetooth speaker to play music, trying to keep the mood light. They entered through a side door, the hinges rusted and half broken. Inside, the air was damp, filled with the smell of mold and rot. The walls were stained with water damage, paint peeling like dead skin. Old medical charts littered the floor. In some corners, wheelchairs and gurneys still stood, rusted and broken. At first, it was almost fun. They laughed nervously, taking photos, joking about ghosts. Arlene led the way, pointing out rooms she remembered, the ER, the nurse's station, the operating room. But as they moved deeper, the atmosphere grew heavier, the laughter died down. They stopped in the pediatric ward. The rows of small metal beds still lined the walls, many with mattresses, blackened by mold. Stuffed animals, long rotted, lay forgotten in corners. The group grew quiet. Arlene couldn't help but remember the children she had cared for here, their cries, their fevers, their parents' desperation. She whispered a quick prayer under her breath. That's when one of the men, Carlo, noticed something. A wheelchair at the far end of the ward had moved. Just a little, a slow roll forward, even though the floor was flat. Everyone froze. They shone their flashlights at it. It was still now. No breeze, no slope, no explanation. Nervous laughter followed, but the unease was clear in their faces. They moved on, trying to shake it off. In the surgery wing, they found an old operating theater. The surgical lights above were rusted, but still hanging. The operating table was cracked but intact. The group took turns sitting in the doctor's chair, pretending to perform surgery, laughing again. But Arlene couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. She kept glancing at the door, half expecting someone to walk in. Then the Bluetooth speaker glitched. It had been playing light pop music, but suddenly the sound distorted, turning into static. And beneath the static, faintly, was something else. The steady beep of a heart monitor. Everyone froze. They looked at Arlene. She shook her head, whispering, "That's impossible." The hospital's power had been cut years ago. There was no way. The sound grew louder, echoing through the room. Then just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence pressed in around them. They decided to head back downstairs, suddenly less eager to keep exploring. As they walked down the main corridor, they heard footsteps behind them, not their own. Heavier, slower. They turned, flashlights sweeping the hall. Empty, but the sound continued, closer and closer, until it seemed just a few steps behind. Panic set in. They hurried to the main lobby, trying to find their way out, but the layout seemed wrong now, twisted. Arlene swore they had taken this hallway before, but now it ended in a blank wall. They turned another corner and found themselves back in the pediatric ward. Even though they were sure they had gone in the opposite direction, it was as if the building was shifting, trapping them. That's when they heard it, the sound of children crying, not one, but many, echoing all around them. The sound was high-pitched, desperate, filling the air like a chorus. They clutched each other, terrified. Arlene raised her flashlight toward the beds. For a moment, she swore she saw them occupied. Small figures lying under the blankets, shifting, crying. One of them sat up slowly, its face pale and hollow, eyes dark sockets. The group screamed and bolted. They ran blindly through the corridors, not caring where they ended up, just desperate to escape. The crying followed them, rising in pitch, joined now by other sounds, gurney squeaking, doors slamming, whispers in Tagalog they couldn't understand. Finally, they burst through a side door into the humid night air, collapsing on the grass outside. The sound stopped instantly. Just silence, broken only by their own gasping breaths. They didn't look back. They got in their car and drove away, shaking, pale, their laughter gone. Later, Arlene admitted something. When she glanced back, just once, against her better judgment, she saw figures watching from the windows of the pediatric ward, dozens of them. Children, nurses, patients, all staring silently as if waiting for them to return. She never went back to that hospital again, but even now, when she drives past, she refuses to look at the building. She says, if you give it attention, it notices you, and once it notices you, it never forgets. Stories like these are reminders that abandoned hospitals are never just empty buildings. They're filled with the memories of everyone who passed through them. In Asia especially, hospitals carry a deep spiritual weight. They're places of birth and death, of joy and grief, of hope and despair. When a hospital closes, those emotions don't simply vanish. They linger, absorbed by the walls, the beds, the objects left behind. In many Asian traditions, there's a belief that spirits tied to sudden or painful deaths have trouble moving on. Hospitals see more of these deaths than almost anywhere else. Some patients who never got to say goodbye, mothers who lost children, families who couldn't afford treatment. All that pain accumulates, and when the building is finally abandoned, the spirits remain with no one left to hear their cries. That's why locals warn against visiting abandoned hospitals. In Thailand, people say hospitals are especially dangerous because of Phai Thai Hong, ghosts of those who died violent or untimely deaths. They are restless, angry, and sometimes vengeful. In the Philippines, they speak of multo, spirits who remain because their deaths left something unresolved. Many nurses and doctors believe these spirits linger in the wards where they took their last breath, still seeking care that will never come. And then there's the physical side. Hospitals are mazes, long corridors, repeating rooms, stairwells that look the same. Once inside, it's easy to get lost, easy to feel like the building itself is shifting around you. For those already frightened, the mind plays tricks. But as we've heard tonight, sometimes it isn't just the mind. Sometimes the sounds are too clear, the figures too distinct, the voices too close. Both stories we heard, the hospital in Thailand, where explorers heard the cries of infants and saw the woman in the stained gown, and the hospital in the Philippines, where Arlene and her friends found themselves trapped in looping corridors, showed the same pattern. These places are not abandoned. They are still alive, in a way, still occupied, still watching. Skeptics will say it's just fear amplifying natural sounds, rats moving furniture, wind whistling through broken windows, the echo of your own footsteps. But if you ask those who've gone in and come out pale and shaken, they'll tell you they felt something more, something personal, something that seemed to reach out and notice them. And once it notices you, that's when the real haunting begins. It's no coincidence that the most common experiences in abandoned hospitals are cries, footsteps, and voices. These are the sounds of life interrupted. A baby who never left the ward, a patient who never left the operating table, a nurse who still walks her rounds even though the hospital has been closed for decades. For the living, those sounds are warnings, a reminder that these halls are not ours anymore. So, if you ever find yourself standing outside a crumbling hospital in Asia, weeds growing through the cracked pavement, windows dark and empty, think twice before you step inside. And if you do, remember this: hospitals are places of beginnings and endings. You might walk in as a visitor, but you may not walk out the same. Because abandoned hospitals don't forget, they don't forgive, and sometimes they don't let you leave. Hey everyone, welcome back to Spirits of Asia. There's something about Malaysia that draws people in. The food, the culture, the mix of old traditions with modern life. But what many visitors don't realize is that beneath all that beauty lies a world most outsiders never see. A world where ancient beliefs about spirits, curses, and supernatural forces still run very deep. Tonight's story is about a young backpacker from Australia who learned this lesson the hard way. Someone who thought accepting a simple gift from a stranger would be harmless. Someone who discovered that in certain parts of Asia, not everything offered freely should be taken home. This incident happened in 2019 in Kuala Lumpur, shared by someone I'll call James, a 24-year-old from Melbourne, who was on his first solo trip through Southeast Asia. He was documenting his journey on social media, posting about the incredible temples, the street food, the friendly locals. But there was one encounter he never posted about, one experience that changed everything. What started as an innocent conversation with a local woman at a night market ended with James fighting for his sanity, his health, and eventually his life. This is his story, and it's a warning about why you should never, ever accept spiritual items from strangers, especially in places where the supernatural is taken very seriously. As usual, I'll break down the cultural background at the end, so stick around if you want to understand what really happened to James and why this type of encounter is more common than you might think. James had been traveling for 3 weeks when he arrived in Kuala Lumpur. He was the kind of traveler who liked to experience everything authentically, staying in hostels, eating street food, talking to locals, rather than just following tourist guides. His Instagram was full of pictures from temples in Thailand, beaches in the Philippines, and now the bustling streets of Malaysia's capital. He was staying in a backpacker hostel in Bukit Bintang, the kind of place where you meet other travelers from around the world. But James preferred exploring on his own. He liked the freedom of wandering without a plan, discovering hidden corners of the city that most tourists never see. It was his second night in KL when he decided to check out the Petaling Street night market in Chinatown. The place was alive with activity, vendors calling out their wares, the smell of satay and char kway teow filling the air, tourists haggling over fake designer bags and watches. James loved the energy of it all. He was walking through the market, just soaking in the atmosphere, when an elderly Chinese woman approached him. She looked to be in her 60s, wearing a simple floral blouse and black pants. Nothing unusual about her appearance, except for her eyes. James would later describe them as incredibly intense, like she was looking right through him. She smiled and started speaking to him in broken English, asking where he was from, how long he'd been in Malaysia, usual questions tourists get. James was friendly, happy to chat. He told her about his travels, how much he was enjoying Malaysia, how different it was from Australia. The woman nodded along, seeming genuinely interested. Then she said something that caught him off guard. "You have very good energy," she said, still smiling. "Very pure, but also very vulnerable. You need protection here." James laughed it off. Protection from what? The woman's expression grew more serious. Malaysia is an old country. Many spirits here, some good, some not so good. Young travelers, like you, they attract attention, not always the kind you want. She reached into a small bag she was carrying and pulled out what looked like a small cloth pouch, about the size of a coin purse. It was dark red fabric, worn and faded, with what appeared to be some kind of symbol embroidered on it in black thread. James couldn't make out what the symbol was, but it looked old, traditional. "This is for protection," she said, holding it out to him. "My grandmother made these very powerful. Keep bad spirits away." James hesitated. He wasn't superstitious, but he also didn't want to be rude. The woman seemed sincere, even concerned for his well-being, and it was just a small pouch, probably filled with herbs or something traditional. "I couldn't take that," he said politely. "It must be valuable." The woman shook her head firmly. "No money. It's gift. You are guest in my country. We must protect guest." She pressed the pouch into his hand. "You carry this while in Malaysia. Very important. Promise me." Something about the urgency in her voice made James accept it. He tucked the pouch into his backpack pocket and thanked her. The woman smiled again, but this time it seemed different, more satisfied than friendly. "Remember," she said as she turned to walk away, "keep with you always while here. Don't take off. Don't let anyone else touch. Very important." James watched her disappear back into the crowd, feeling slightly bewildered by the whole encounter. He didn't think much more about it that night, just went back to his hostel and crashed. The next morning, James woke up feeling strange, not sick exactly, but off somehow, like he hadn't slept well, even though he'd been exhausted. He chalked it up to the heat and humidity, grabbed some breakfast, and headed out to explore more of the city. He spent the day visiting the Batu Caves, taking the typical tourist photos, posting them to his Instagram stories. But something felt different. He kept getting this sensation that someone was watching him, even when he was alone. Several times he turned around, expecting to see someone behind him, but there was never anyone there. That night, back at the hostel, James was scrolling through his photos when he noticed something odd. In several of the pictures he'd taken at the caves, there seemed to be a shadow that didn't belong. Not a person, just a dark shape that appeared in the background of multiple shots. It was subtle, probably just an artifact from his phone camera, but it was definitely there. He showed the photos to his roommate, a British guy named Tom, who'd been backpacking for months. "Mate, that's just the lighting," Tom said, barely glancing at the screen. "These phone cameras are rubbish in bright sun." James nodded, but something about it bothered him. The shadows seemed to be in the same position relative to him in every photo, like it was following him. The third day, James decided to visit the Islamic Arts Museum. He'd read good things about it online, and he was interested in learning more about Malaysian culture. But as soon as he walked into the building, that feeling of being watched intensified. He was looking at a display of traditional Malaysian crafts when he felt someone tap his shoulder. He turned around, but no one was there. The closest person was an elderly Malaysian man about 10 feet away, clearly absorbed in reading a plaque about Islamic calligraphy. James tried to shake it off and continued through the museum, but the feeling persisted. Worse, he started hearing things. Whispers in a language he didn't understand, coming from behind him or just at the edge of his hearing. Every time he turned to look, there was nothing there. By the time he left the museum, James was genuinely unsettled. He wasn't someone who believed in ghosts or spirits, but something was definitely wrong. He felt watched, followed, like there was a presence just out of sight that wouldn't leave him alone. That evening, he called his girlfriend Sarah back in Melbourne. "I'm probably just tired," he told her, trying to sound casual, "but I've been having the weirdest experiences here, like someone's following me, but there's never anyone there." Sarah was concerned but practical. "Maybe you're just overwhelmed? You've been traveling for weeks. Maybe you need a rest day." James agreed to take it easy the next day, but privately he was starting to wonder if the strange feelings had something to do with the pouch the old woman had given him. He pulled it out of his backpack and examined it more closely. The fabric was old, definitely handmade. The symbol embroidered on it looked like Chinese characters, but not any he recognized. There was something else too. The pouch had a smell, faint but distinct, not unpleasant exactly, but organic, like dried herbs mixed with something else he couldn't identify. Inside the pouch, he could feel small objects, not just herbs, something harder, like small stones or pieces of bone. He thought about opening it to look inside, but something stopped him. The woman's words echoed in his head, "Don't let anyone else touch." James decided to do some research. He went to an internet cafe and started Googling Malaysian amulets and protection charms. What he found made his stomach drop. There were dozens of articles about tourists being targeted with cursed objects in Southeast Asia, stories of people who accepted gifts from strangers, only to find themselves experiencing nightmares, bad luck, or worse. Some of the accounts described exactly what James was experiencing, the feeling of being followed, whispers, shadows, and photographs. One article particularly caught his attention. It was from a Malaysian newspaper, dated just 6 months earlier. The headline read, "Tourist scam involving cursed amulets continues to target visitors." The article described a sophisticated con where elderly women would approach tourists in markets and tourist areas, offering them protection amulets. The amulets weren't for protection at all. They were designed to make the person vulnerable to spiritual attack. Once someone accepted the amulet and kept it with them, they would begin experiencing supernatural harassment. Eventually, they would become so desperate that they'd pay large sums of money to have the curse removed. James's hands were shaking as he read. This was exactly what had happened to him. The woman, the night market, the insistence that he keep the amulet with him always. he'd walked right into it. But according to the article, it got worse. The longer someone kept the cursed amulet, the stronger the attachment became. What started as feeling watched could escalate to physical manifestations, health problems, even dangerous situations where the person might harm themselves or others. James immediately wanted to throw the pouch away, but the article warned against that too. Simply discarding a cursed object could cause it to bounce back with increased intensity. The only way to properly remove the curse was through specific rituals performed by qualified spiritual practitioners. The problem was, James had no idea who to trust. If there were people running scams with cursed amulets, how could he know which spiritual practitioners were legitimate and which were just part of the same con? He spent the rest of the day researching, trying to find reliable information about how to handle his situation. Most of the advice he found online was conflicting or seemed questionable. Some sources said to bury the object at a crossroads at midnight. Others insisted it needed to be returned to water. Still, others claimed that only a Buddhist monk or Muslim imam could properly neutralize it. As evening approached, James felt increasingly desperate. The whispers were getting louder, and he was starting to see movement in his peripheral vision, dark shapes that vanished when he looked directly at them. He decided to call the Australian embassy, thinking they might have experience with this kind of tourist problem. The person he spoke to was sympathetic, but not particularly helpful. "We do get reports of scams involving spiritual items," the embassy worker told him, "but we can't really recommend specific religious practitioners. Your best bet is probably to go to a legitimate temple or mosque and ask for help." James thanked him and hung up, feeling more alone than ever. He was in a foreign country, dealing with something he didn't understand, and he had no idea who he could trust. That night, alone in his hostel room, James barely slept. The whispers had turned into what sounded like conversations in a language he didn't recognize. Sometimes they seemed to be coming from inside the room. Once, he could have sworn he heard someone laughing softly right next to his ear. Every time he started to drift off, he would jolt awake with the sensation that someone was touching him. His skin felt crawly, like insects were walking on it. When he looked in the mirror, his face was pale and drawn, with dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there a few days ago. James knew he needed help, but he was terrified of making the situation worse. Tomorrow, he decided, he would have to take the risk of approaching someone for help. He just hoped it wouldn't be too late. The presence in his room seemed to sense his decision. As he lay in bed, trying to ignore the whispers and the feeling of being watched, he could have sworn he heard something that sounded almost like approval, like whatever was attached to him was pleased with how things were progressing. The morning after his restless night, James woke up feeling worse than ever. His reflection in the hostel bathroom mirror showed someone who looked genuinely ill, dark circles under his eyes, pale complexion, and there was something else. A rash had appeared on his arms overnight, small red bumps that itched constantly. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was allergic to something he'd eaten, or the humidity was getting to him. But deep down, he knew this was connected to the amulet. The timing was too coincidental. James spent the morning researching temples and spiritual practitioners in Kuala Lumpur. He needed help, but he had to be careful not to walk into another scam. After reading dozens of reviews and forum posts, he decided to visit the Thian Hao Temple. It was one of the largest Chinese temples in Southeast Asia, well-established and legitimate. If anyone there could help him, at least he could trust they weren't running some tourist con. The temple was about 20 minutes by taxi from his hostel. As the car wound its way up the hill to the temple complex, James felt a strange resistance, like something was trying to discourage him from going there. The whispers, which had been constant background noise for days, suddenly got louder and more agitated. When he stepped out of the taxi at the temple entrance, the sensation was overwhelming. The moment his feet touched the ground, the whispers turned into what sounded almost like screaming, but so faint only he could hear it. The rash on his arms began burning. The Thian Hao Temple was beautiful, a massive six-tiered complex with traditional Chinese architecture, red pillars and sweeping rooftops. Hundreds of people were moving through the courtyards, lighting incense, praying, taking photos. It should have felt peaceful, but for James, it felt like walking into enemy territory. He approached one of the temple volunteers, an elderly Chinese woman who spoke good English. "Excuse me," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I need to speak to someone about a spiritual problem. Someone gave me an amulet, and I think it might be cursed. The woman studied his face carefully, and James could see recognition in her eyes. This wasn't the first time someone had come to her with this problem. "You come with me," she said quietly. "We find someone to help." She led him through several courtyards to a smaller building behind the main temple. Inside, it looked more like an office than a religious space. A middle-aged man in casual clothes was sitting behind a desk, but James could see ritual objects and religious texts on shelves around the room. The woman spoke to the man in rapid Cantonese, occasionally gesturing toward James. The man's expression grew serious as she talked. Finally, he turned to James and spoke in accented but clear English. "I am Mr. Chen. Sister Liu tells me you have problem with cursed object. Show me." James pulled the red pouch from his backpack. The moment it came into view, both Mr. Chen and Sister Liu took a step back. Mr. Chen muttered something in Chinese, then looked at James with what appeared to be a mixture of sympathy and concern. "Where you get this?" he asked. James explained the encounter at the night market, how the old woman had insisted he take the amulet for protection, how the problems had started almost immediately. Mr. Chen nodded grimly. "This is Bikang, very bad magic. Not for protection, for control." He examined the pouch without touching it. "You see symbol here? This is for binding spirits to person. Make them vulnerable." "Can you remove it?" James asked desperately. While Mr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "It's possible, but not simple. This type of curse is designed to get stronger over time. Already you have symptoms. The rash, yes, hearing, things, feeling watched." James nodded. "Will get worse if we do nothing. But removing in proper way can cause, how you say, backlash, make things much worse very quickly." James felt his stomach drop. What kind of backlash? Depends how strong attachment is now. Could be accident, sickness, very bad luck that follow you a long time. Sometimes the spirits that were called, they get angry when binding is broken, wrong way. They might try to harm person who broke free. Sister Liu spoke up in English. "But if he does nothing, what happens?" Mr. Chen's expression darkened. "Eventually, the curse take complete hold. Person become like puppet, do things they not want to do, sometimes hurt themselves or others. The people who make these curses, they want victim to come back, desperate, willing to pay anything to make it stop." James felt sick. "So what do I do?" "We can help," Mr. Chen said, "but will take time. Cannot be done quickly or cheaply. Need proper ritual, specific materials, and most important, need to find out exactly what type of spirits were bound to this object." James felt sick. "So what do I do?" "First, you must examine the amulet more carefully, but cannot touch directly. Too dangerous for everyone involved." Mr. Chen called over another temple volunteer, a younger man who spoke excellent English, and explained the situation. The younger man, who introduced himself as David, nodded grimly. "This is more common than you might think. Tourist police in KL have been cracking down on these scams, but the people behind them are clever. They target foreigners who don't understand local customs." David explained that there were different levels of these cursed amulets. Some were designed to just cause minor bad luck and supernatural harassment, enough to scare the victim into paying for removal. But others, particularly those that looked as old and elaborate as the one James carried, were much more dangerous. "The symbol on your amulet," David said, peering at it from a safe distance. "That's not Chinese. It's a binding sigil. Probably Vietnamese or Cambodian origin. Very old style of magic. Much more serious than the simple stuff most scammers use." Mr. Chen spoke to David in Cantonese again, then turned back to James. "We need to take you to someone with more experience. This is beyond what we can safely handle here. I know a bomo, a traditional healer, who specializes in removing this type of curse. But must warn you, the process will not be pleasant." James's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "When spirits have been attached to person for several days, they become protective of their host. Removing them forcefully can cause them to lash out. You may experience physical and mental effects during cleansing ritual. Sometimes people become violent, speak in languages they don't know, or have what Western medicine would call seizures." The thought terrified James, but he knew he had no choice. The alternative was to let whatever was attached to him grow stronger until it completely took over his life. David offered to accompany James to the Bomo's house that evening. It's better to do these rituals after sunset, he explained. The spirits are more active then, which makes them easier to identify and remove. James spent the rest of the day at the temple, afraid to leave in case the supernatural harassment got worse. The whispers had become almost constant now, sometimes in what sounded like multiple voices, having conversations he couldn't understand. The rash on his arms had spread to his chest and back, and he started experiencing what felt like muscle spasms. Several times, temple visitors looked at him strangely. One elderly Chinese woman actually crossed herself and hurried away when she saw him. David explained that sensitive people could sometimes perceive the dark energy around someone who was under supernatural attack. She probably saw the shadow figures that follow you, David said matter-of-factly. People with spiritual sight can see them clearly. James felt a chill. There are things following me, 2 or 3, from what I can sense. Small spirits, probably bound to the amulet to cause harassment and fear. There is something else too, something bigger that's been drawn to the spiritual disturbance. That's what we're really worried about. As evening approached, James felt his anxiety skyrocket. He called Sarah again, but didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding completely insane. I'm dealing with some health issues, he told her. Nothing serious. Just, I might need to extend my trip by a few days to see a local doctor. Sarah was concerned, but supportive. Just take care of yourself, okay? And let me know if you need me to fly out there. James thanked her and hung up, wishing he could tell her the truth, but knowing she'd think he'd lost his mind. At sunset, David led James to a taxi. The Bomo lived in a kampong, a traditional village, about an hour outside Kuala Lumpur. As they drove through the darkening streets, James noticed that the whispers were getting more agitated. By the time they reached the village, he could have sworn he heard his name being called repeatedly in voices he didn't recognize. The Bomo's house was a simple wooden structure surrounded by tropical plants and trees. Wind chimes hung from the eaves, creating soft musical sounds in the evening breeze. Despite the pleasant appearance, James felt a strong reluctance to approach the front door, like something was physically trying to push him away. The Bomo herself was a small, elderly Malay woman named Sheikh Maina. She wore a simple white headscarf and spoke only Malay and a little Chinese, so David translated for James. When David explained the situation and showed her the amulet, Sheikh Maina's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She stepped back quickly, said something sharp in Malay, and made what looked like protective gestures with her hands. She says this is very serious, black magic, David translated, not tourist scam level. This is real sorcery, designed to completely destroy someone's life. She wants to know if you have any idea who might want to harm you this badly. James was confused. I thought it was just a random tourist scam. David spoke with the Kemaina again, then turned back to James with a troubled expression. She says this level of curse requires specific targeting. Someone would need your full name, your photograph, and ideally something personal belonging to you to create something this powerful. The woman who gave it to you must have gathered this information somehow. James thought back to the encounter at the night market. The woman had asked his name, where he was from, how long he'd been traveling. She'd seemed so friendly and concerned, but now he realized she'd been gathering personal information to strengthen the curse. But why? James asked. I'm nobody. I don't have money or enemies. David posed the question to Chikmina, who responded at length in Malay. She says there are several possibilities. Maybe you were chosen randomly, that someone paid for a very expensive curse to test the sorcerer's power. Maybe you remind someone of a person who hurt them. Or maybe, David hesitated. What? Maybe they plan to demand a large payment to remove it. This type of curse would cost tens of thousands of dollars to have removed by the person who cast it. Much more than simple tourist scam. James felt sick to his stomach. Someone had targeted him specifically with powerful black magic, either for revenge or as part of an elaborate extortion scheme. Chikamaina gestured for James to follow her to the back of the house, where she had set up what was clearly a ritual space, candles, incense burners, bowls of water, and various objects James didn't recognize were arranged on a low table. The Bomo began lighting incense and muttering what sounded like prayers or incantations. David explained that Sheikh Maina would first try to communicate with the spirits attached to James to understand their nature and the terms of their binding. Only then could she determine the safest way to remove them. "She needs you to sit in the center of that circle," David said, pointing to a ring of white powder that had been drawn on the floor, "and you must give her the amulet, but she'll use tools to handle it. Don't touch it with your bare hands." James sat cross-legged in the circle, feeling more vulnerable than he'd ever felt in his life. The moment Sigmina began her incantations, the whispers around him turned into what sounded like screaming. The burning sensation on his skin intensified, and he began to feel dizzy. "Don't leave the circle, no matter what happens," David warned. "The protective barrier will keep the spirits from fully manifesting, but if you step outside, you'll be completely vulnerable." For the next hour, James endured the most terrifying experience of his life. Tikimina chanted in Malay, in what sounded like other languages, occasionally throwing herbs into the fire or sprinkling water around the room. The spirit's reaction was violent. James felt like invisible hands were grabbing at him. The temperature in the room seemed to fluctuate wildly, and several times he heard what sounded like furniture being thrown around, though nothing actually moved. The worst part was when Hikmina began directly addressing the spirits. James couldn't understand the words, but he could hear responses that seemed to come from right next to his ears. Harsh, angry voices, arguing with the Bomo in languages he'd never heard. Finally, Sigmina sat back and spoke to David at length. Her expression was grave. She's identified 3 bound spirits and one that was attracted by the spiritual disturbance. David translated. "The good news is that the binding was done hastily, probably within the last few weeks. If it had been done properly over months or years, it would be almost impossible to remove safely." "What's the bad news?" "The spirits are very angry, and they've been feeding off your fear and confusion. They're stronger now than when they were first bound to you. The removal process will be intense." James nodded, steeling himself. "Just get them out of me." Sigmaina began the actual removal ritual. She had James hold his hands palm up while she worked with the cursed amulet, using a pair of metal tongs. As she began cutting the binding threads that held the pouch together, James felt like his entire body was on fire. The spirit's reaction was immediate and violent. James began convulsing uncontrollably, and the voices that had been whispering suddenly seemed to be shouting from inside his own head. He heard himself making sounds he'd never made before, guttural noises that didn't seem human. Amatus. At one point, he became aware that he was speaking, but not in English or any language he knew. The words seemed to be coming from somewhere else, using his voice but not originating from his conscious mind. David later told him that the spirits had been threatening Sigmaina in ancient Khmer, warning her that removing them would bring terrible consequences. But the Bamo had continued her work, methodically severing the spiritual attachments while protecting herself with prayers and ritual tools. The climax came when Sigmaina finally opened the amulet and removed its contents. James caught a glimpse of what looked like small bones, dried herbs, and what might have been human hair before she quickly threw everything into the fire. The moment the contents hit the flames, James felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Every muscle in his body seized, he screamed involuntarily, and then suddenly everything went quiet. The whispers stopped. The burning sensation on his skin faded. For the first time in days, James felt alone inside his own head. He looked up to find Chikmaina and David watching him carefully. The Bamo said something in Malay and smiled for the first time that evening. "It's done," David translated. "The spirits have been banished, and the curse is broken, but she says you need to be very careful for the next few days. Sometimes there can be after effects." James felt overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. What kind of after effects? Your spiritual defenses are still weak from the attack. You might attract other spirits or negative energy more easily for a while. She's going to give you some protective items to carry, and she strongly recommends that you leave Malaysia as soon as possible. Why? David's expression was serious. Because whoever did this to you is still out there, and now they know their curse has been removed. James felt overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. What kind of after effects? The spiritual defenses are still weak from the attack. You might attract other spirits or negative energy more easily for a while. She's going to give you some protective items to carry, and she strongly recommends that you leave Malaysia as soon as possible. Why? David's expression was serious. Because whoever did this to you is still out there, and now they know their curse has been removed. James felt a chill run down his spine. How would they know? When a binding is broken, especially one this strong, the person who cast it feels it immediately. It's like a spiritual cord being severed. They'll know that someone with real power helped you, and they might not be happy about that. Takimanai gave James several items to protect himself: a small silver amulet blessed in proper ceremonies, a packet of protective herbs to carry with him, and a piece of paper with prayers written in Jawi script that she instructed him to keep in his wallet. These are real protection, David translated. Not like the cursed object you received, but they will only work if you truly believe and if you avoid places and people connected to black magic. The Bomo also gave James specific instructions for the next few days. He was to avoid going out alone after dark, stay away from crowded markets and tourist areas where the scam operators worked, and most importantly, book a flight out of Malaysia within 48 hours. As they drove back to Kuala Lumpur, James felt like a completely different person. The constant whispers had stopped. The feeling of being watched was gone, and for the first time in days he felt alone inside his own head. The rash on his arms was already starting to fade. But David's warning stayed with him. As they reached the city, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was still in danger. Back at his hostel, James immediately went online to change his flight. He'd originally planned to stay in Malaysia for another week, but now he just wanted to get home. The earliest flight to Melbourne was the next evening, and he booked it without hesitation. That night, James barely slept, but not because of supernatural harassment. He was just too wired from the whole experience. He kept thinking about how close he'd come to being completely destroyed by something he didn't even believe in. The next morning, he called Sarah and told her he was coming home early. "I thought you loved Malaysia," she said. "You were posting about how much you wanted to explore more of the country." I'm ready to come home," James said. "I'll tell you everything when I see you." James spent his last day in KL keeping a low profile. He stayed in well-lit, crowded areas, avoided markets entirely, and didn't talk to any strangers. Several times he thought he spotted the old woman who had given him the cursed amulet, but he couldn't be sure. Every elderly Chinese woman in a floral shirt made him nervous. At the airport that evening, James felt safer, but still anxious. As he checked in for his flight, the airline staff member, a young Malaysian woman, looked at him strangely. "Sir, are you feeling all right? You look very tired." James realized he must still look pretty rough from everything he'd been through. "Just ready to get home," he said. As he waited at his gate, James reflected on everything that had happened a week ago. He'd been a skeptical backpacker who thought supernatural beliefs were just cultural superstition. Now, he knew firsthand that there were things in this world he couldn't understand or explain. The flight to Melbourne was uneventful, and James slept for most of it. When he woke up as they were descending, he felt like the entire experience in Malaysia might have been a dream, but the protective amulet around his neck and the herbs in his backpack reminded him that it had all been very real. Sarah met him at the airport, and the moment she saw him, she knew something significant had happened. "James, you look like you've been through hell. What happened over there?" In the car on the way home, James told her everything about the old woman at the market, the cursed amulet, the supernatural harassment, the temple visit, and the Bamo's ritual. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "I know how it sounds," James said when he finished. "I know you probably think I had some kind of breakdown or something." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Actually," she said finally, "I don't think you're crazy. My grandmother always warned me about accepting spiritual items from strangers when traveling. She said different cultures have different rules about these things, and if you don't understand them, you can get into serious trouble." James felt a wave of relief that Sarah believed him. Over the next few weeks, he gradually readjusted to life in Melbourne, but the experience had changed him fundamentally. He found himself more sensitive to spiritual atmospheres in places, more careful about accepting gifts from strangers, and much more respectful of cultural beliefs that he'd once dismissed. 3 months later, James received a message on social media from David, the temple volunteer who had helped him. "Thought you should know," the message read. Tourist police raided a scam operation in Petaling Street Market last month. They arrested 6 people, including an elderly woman who was targeting foreigners with cursed amulets. She had a whole operation set up, with people gathering personal information about tourists and then cursing items specifically for each victim. You weren't the only one, but you were lucky to get help when you did. Some of the other victims weren't so fortunate. James showed the message to Sarah. "So it was all real," she said. "Someone really did target you specifically." "Yeah," James replied. "Makes me wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found help." He never found out what happened to the woman who had cursed him, but he didn't really want to know. What mattered was that he had escaped, learned from the experience, and could warn others. James eventually returned to traveling, but he was much more cautious about accepting gifts from strangers, especially spiritual or cultural items. He also made it a point to research local beliefs and customs before visiting new places, understanding that being a respectful traveler meant more than just being polite. It meant understanding that some cultural practices could be genuinely dangerous if you didn't approach them properly. So what exactly happened to James? And why are these types of supernatural scams so common in Southeast Asia? Let me explain the cultural and spiritual context that makes stories like this possible. First, it's important to understand that in Malaysia and much of Southeast Asia, supernatural beliefs aren't just cultural curiosities. They're living, practiced realities that affect daily life for millions of people. The belief in spirits, curses, and protective magic is deeply embedded in traditional Malaysian culture. Whether you're talking about Malay Muslim traditions, Chinese folk religion, or indigenous beliefs, the type of curse James encountered is known as bekang in some Malaysian Chinese communities, or santau in Malay tradition. These are binding curses designed to attach negative spirits to a person, making them vulnerable to spiritual attack and bad luck. The purpose is usually to weaken someone, so they become desperate enough to pay for expensive removal rituals. What makes these scams so effective is that they combine real spiritual practices with criminal intent. The woman who cursed James wasn't just running a simple compromise. She was using actual techniques from traditional black magic, but for the purpose of extortion rather than legitimate spiritual reasons. Here's how the scam typically works. Operators identify foreign tourists who seem wealthy or naive about local customs. They approach them in markets or tourist areas with stories designed to elicit personal information. Your full name, where you're from, details about your family. This information is then used to create personalized cursed objects. The cursed items are real, in the sense that they're created using traditional methods that locals genuinely believe will attract negative spiritual attention to the victim. The psychological and spiritual pressure this creates often leads to exactly the symptoms James experienced as of feeling watched, hearing whispers, seeing shadows, developing mysterious health problems. The scammers then wait for the victim to become desperate enough to seek help. At this point, they or their associates pose as spiritual healers who can remove the cursed bara for a substantial fee, often thousands of dollars. What James encountered was actually a more sophisticated version of the scam. The level of curse used on him suggests he was specifically targeted, not randomly chosen. Someone gathered detailed personal information about him and invested significant time and resources into creating a powerful spiritual attack. This indicates he was either very unlucky or someone identified him as a particularly valuable target. The Malaysian government has been cracking down on these operations in recent years. Tourist police in Kuala Lumpur now regularly raid fake spiritual healers and arrest people running supernatural scams. But the practice continues because it's so profitable, and because the line between legitimate traditional healing and criminal activity can sometimes be difficult to define legally. For travelers, the lesson is clear. Never accept spiritual or religious items from strangers, especially items that are supposed to provide protection or bring good luck. In traditional Asian cultures, genuine protective amulets are blessed by recognized religious authorities, and given specific ceremonies, they're not handed out randomly to tourists in markets. If you're interested in traditional spiritual practices while traveling, always go through established temples, recognized healers, or reputable cultural organizations. And remember, in many Asian cultures, spiritual power is not taken lightly. It's not entertainment or curiosity. It's a serious matter that requires proper respect and understanding. James's story is a reminder that when we travel, especially to places with deep spiritual traditions, we need to approach those traditions with genuine respect and caution. What might seem like harmless tourist experiences can sometimes have very real consequences that we don't understand until it's too late. The supernatural world, whether you believe in it or not, is taken very seriously in many parts of Asia, and that seriousness, unfortunately, can sometimes be exploited by people with criminal intent.